feeling? Come on. We're feeling all right? Ah, thank you, Leslie. All right, so I already know that everyone was partying a little bit last night, let their hair down, so I know you might be a little subdued, but we're going to get through today because this is our last day. It's been great. Over the past few days, I hope you've had your fill of knowledge and networking. Just to remind you, please continue to use the mobile app for questions and give your feedback. And we are going to just jump in. So let's begin our first session. So today's session, our first session is The Secret to Transform Your Resiliency Program. It's going to be presented by Regina Phelps and Art Powers. Now, I'm sure everyone says, all I have to say is Regina. Everybody knows who that is. But I'm going to let, just in case there's people in this room that don't know who she is, she's an internationally recognized thought leader in crisis management, exercise design, and pandemic planning. Since 1982, she has provided clients with consultation, training, and speaking and services in 5 continents. 5. She founded a consulting firm called Emergency Management and Safety Solutions. Ms. Phelps' areas of expertise, which I can go for days, but it's crisis management, team development, pandemic planning, and the development of exercises in large global companies. She's an author of one crisis management and 3 exercise books, which are available on Amazon and also available a little bit later if you haven't gotten them already. Just a partial client list that she has: Whole Foods, Levi Strauss, the World Bank, Starbucks, my favorite, Salesforce, Black Hawk Network, Ellie Mae, LabCorp, Bank of Peru, Bank of Colombia, the Graduate Institute of Geneva, IMF, the Handover, Jackson, ETS, I can't say the other one, and Synopsys. And to me, like I said, she is a legend. So welcome, Regina. Now, the second one we have is Art Powers. Art Powers leads the technical field of emergency preparedness and response at ExxonMobil. He is responsible for the professional development of emergency response practitioners in the areas of tactical and strategic response, business continuity, incident management system training, global response team management, and exercise training. Since 2021, he's been senior principal of EPNR, supporting global emergency response, providing consultation on guidelines for response and exercise design. Please help me welcome Regina Phelps and Art Powers.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. Last day, oh yay. My job today is to talk about something that I think is so important. And what I call it really is the secret tool that can actually transform your program. And just like you see in the slide in front of you, you start as a caterpillar in this work, right? And you move along in your development. And as you go through that chrysalis stage, that kind of messy, gooey stage, then you turn into a beautiful butterfly. So I've been in practice a long time. And one of the things that I've discovered in all of these years is that we have the power to really transform your organization with one particular thing that we do. So I want to talk about today the golden opportunity of what that means. And what I want to then is peel back to you what the critical keys for success are to utilize this golden opportunity that we all possess. And then I also want to then talk about introducing Art, who's going to talk about what he does. Let me just stop for a second. The clock isn't running up here, so I just want to make sure I don't talk too long. So if you can start it, that would be great. All right, so we do a couple of polls today on my session and in Art, so I'm sure you all know this by now. Pull out the DRJ app, and then what I want you to do is I want you to go to the session page, blah, 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 find this session, access polling, and we're going to have 2 poll questions in my session and 2 in Art's back to back. So let's talk about this thing called the golden opportunity. Every single person, I am just guessing, in this room does something on a regular basis. And what I want you to think about is this golden opportunity. And what do we do on a regular basis? Probably everybody in this room does exercises. Now, what I've learned in all of my years of practice is that yes, you can write plans, and yes, you can do training, and blah, 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 blah. But if you actually want to build a program that actually has legs, that actually changes an organization, the best thing you can do is a well-designed, crafted exercise. So I want to talk about how exercises have the best opportunity to, first of all, promote your program. Everybody wants to talk about ways that they can actually promote the work that they do. You do a great exercise, people are going to talk about that for days, for weeks, for months. Why? Because you have shaken them to their very core. That's what you want to do. You just don't want to check the box kind of thing. You want something that's going to grab people. It's the best way you have to educate your teams. Yes, I know we do plans. I know we do training. But you know, when you do plan development, we're sitting in a nice, comfortable office. There's air conditioning or heat. There's lights. There's nothing going on. When you do an exercise and you sort of remove many things, depending on the narrative, of course, then people actually have to use that stuff. And it changes how they view the work. It's all about making it real. It gives you an opportunity to validate those plans because we are basically filling in forms, we're documenting what we're going to do, but we don't have to live it in the moment. And so it's really important that you think about that in design. It also gives you a great opportunity to show your value every single day. You know, when people talk about the work we do, broadly across the enterprise of resiliency, people always talk about return on investment. But you know, that's not a good metric for what we do at all. Because the only way ROI actually works is if something bad happens. And then they can say, ooh, it would have cost this, but it'll only cost that. But you know, most of my clients, and I work for many large corporations all over the world, most people don't have activations every year. So then when money gets tight and people get a little concerned, it's like, well, if you're only talking about the money that you would save people or the clients you might save as an ROI, then it's hard to actually justify your existence. But if you talk about the value you give to the organization every single day, that's very different. And I've done many speeches on this, and I think it's really important. And a great way that you show value is by doing an exercise that really moves people. It excites them. It makes them really look at their plans. You engage people in ways that you would never do before. And what that does is that it shows value. It also is a great way to engage senior leadership. I primarily do crisis management team exercises. I do all of the flavors as well, but that's kind of my core thing. And so it's a great way to then engage the tactical crisis management team, who then might be giving reports up to the executives, and then everybody sort of learns their job. If you don't train executives what their job is in a crisis, they make assumptions that they do everything. No, stand down. You don't do that. So it's a way that you can actually teach them their job. And then lastly, of course, the whole reason you do an exercise is to build resiliency. And that's what we're all about. My belief, my personal belief, is that the most important part of your job, if you do exercises, is developing a really well-crafted exercise that will change people's lives, change their views on things. And that, for me, is really important. So how is that even possible? Well, first of all, you have the opportunity in an exercise to influence their human behavior. That's amazing to me, right? I have done over 3,700 exercises in my over 40 years of practice, and I know that I can actually design something that will chill people to the bones, that they're going to really get around, and they will be different when they walk out of that room. That's my whole goal every time I do one. So I want to be influencing their behavior. So it's a great way for you to clarify roles and responsibilities. I know you have documented a plan. How many people really read the plan? How many people could digest it and tell you exactly what's in it? But if you make them do things in an exercise, then they learn exactly who does what. Really important. Secondarily, it's the best way you have to improve performance. I know you do trainings, but it's not like doing. Doing is everything. And that's what an exercise should be, actually making people do. It's a great way to motivate people. They may not really read your plan seriously, but before the exercise, if they know they're going to have to perform and they're going to have to deliver, oh my gosh, people read the plan. Maybe they'll talk to people that are in the plan. Maybe they'll talk to other people about how they work with them. That's great. I'm actually changing their performance. I want people to be super confident in any response, and I can do that in an exercise. And I also want to teach them leadership and decision-making skills. It's easy to make decisions when nothing bad's going on. But when the world is falling apart, I want people to be able to stand up and in their core be able to give decisions. And if they make the wrong decision, they make another one. That's what we do in exercises. That's what we do in a crisis. So that's what I want you to be thinking about, is the power you have when you actually design a good exercise. It builds support for your program. You have kind of a chilling exercise and people are like, wow, I am so glad we're doing this. I am so glad we're actually spending the time and effort. That's what you want. But that means you need to really think about your exercises as the best opportunity you have to actually change your program and your organization. So, what we're trying to build in this whole thing, of course, is critical thinking. Many years ago, people used to learn critical thinking in schools, and they don't so much do that anymore. And so, critical thinking allows us to evaluate the facts that are in front of us, and then actually make decisions, remain objective, and move forward. If the decision was wrong, you make another one. That's what you want to be thinking about. And so I'm all about, in an exercise, clarifying goals. Really, what are we all about? I also want to make sure we look at a lot of assumptions. People make so many assumptions. An example is that there's a term that we use all the time in crisis management, which is the idea of cognitive bias. What does that mean? People have had lots of experience. So like we're in Florida. What's the number one disaster that people experience in Florida? Hurricanes, right? Absolutely. So I have worked with people down in Florida, and they'll say, yeah, I've been through 1,000 hurricanes. Yeah. And it's like, to me, when I hear that, it's dangerous. That's cognitive bias. Because when the hurricane happens, they're not seeing what's in front of them. They're seeing what they think is going to happen, what happened last time. So I need to really make sure that they're really looking at their assumptions about how bad it could be. So that's super important. That also gives you an idea to look at their values, any biases that they have. I want people to evaluate what's in front of them, and then I want them to actually make decisions, and I want them to act. And if they act and it's wrong, I want them to make another one. No harm, no foul. And I want them to always be assessing what they're doing. Because my goal in an exercise, I'm trying to change the company. And that sounds kind of crazy, but I really am. I'm trying to change how they look at things. I'm trying to build support for the people who hire us, so my clients actually go like, wow, this work is so important. I'm trying to get them to be very good at problem solving. I'm trying to make darn sure that they know how to actually analyze what's in front of them, and then actually make decisions and activate the appropriate sources. I also want to make sure that they are communicating. So in an exercise where the comms team says, okay, we would write the following, it's like, no. You're going to write it. I want to see it. I want to go through whatever your process is for approval. I don't want you to just tell me what you would say. Do it, right? This is an opportunity for you to be super creative. It's an opportunity for them to build their own creativity. Because ultimately what we're trying to do in this exercise is to make them understand they have to be open-minded. I know you have a plan, but a lot of times that plan isn't going to work. A lot of times that plan doesn't have what you need. So you better be creative, you better be adaptable, you better be open-minded, and you better be able to take whatever's in front of you and just make it work. Now, this whole idea of developing skills is all about the things that we do every day. What do we do for a living? We recognize problems. Whether you're utilizing a tool like a BIA, or you're looking at sort of incident reports, or incidents that are happening in the field, whatever it is, you're looking at problems. And your job as a continuity planner, as a crisis manager, is to find workable solutions to solve this. I want people to also understand in an exercise that they better learn how to prioritize. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but in crises, you don't get one thing at a time. Like, here's one problem, okay, great, solve that. Here's another problem, okay, solve that. No, they get 20 things, they get 30 things. And then sometimes in an exercise, people go like, oh my gosh, this is too much. Oh, really? You can't stop that in a crisis. So I need them to get 20 things, and then I need them to go, okay, I can't do 20 things, what am I gonna do? One, okay, move this up. That's what you should be doing, and that's what a good exercise can do. I want them to really look at any kind of assumptions they have, any values they have, and their job is to see what's given to them, the data, interpret it, and then do something. And so I want them to issue a judgment, make a decision, see how it flies, and then I want them to move on. That's what a good exercise will do. Absolutely. But frankly, isn't that what you want in an activation? You want the same thing. So make your exercises feel like that. Because I'm trying to build leadership. That's my goal every day. I want to build leadership, and I want to make sure that I'm engaging everybody. So that's what a good exercise does, is I have good leadership skills, I've got good behaviors, and I'm trying to actually do a lot of different things. I can actually learn and teach people how to manage a stressful situation. Because disasters, crises, activations are super stressful. It's better to practice that in a real exercise than to just have your first rodeo be one where you're actually seeing how bad it is. I also want to make sure that I actually have them solve problems in real time. You can't have a meeting 2 weeks from now to figure this out. You better figure it out right now. And I want to make sure that they're taking these fixes that they just did, because if they open their plan and there's nothing there, I want them to realize, like, holy moly, I got to do something else. What's the fix? Let's do it. Managing politics. Any politics in your organization? Man, I'll tell you, there's politics, and then in a crisis, there are politics on steroids. And there's a lot of people that are juggling and trying to get this and that and blah, blah, blah. So it's a great opportunity to see how that all flies and how that gets managed. It's my opportunity to influence others. When I design exercises, my goal is to influence them to think about how they're organized, how they work, what their plans are in. I want them to get better. That's my whole thing. I also really spend a lot of time making sure that they know how to communicate. In this whole process, we are planning, we are prioritizing, and we're reevaluating. When we design crisis management teams and corporations, we use a modified version of the incident command system. We always teach incident action planning. How do you actually come together, make a decision to activate, develop a plan of action? They're called objectives, and then you work those things. Then you come back again at the end of that operational period and you say, wow, what's going on? What's happening? How are we doing? That's important. That takes practice. I want to make sure that they can also, though, innovate. And I want them to take risks, because that's what you do all the time in a crisis. You're taking risks all the time. So I want them to do that with me. I'm all about vision and strategy. I want them to set a course. We're going here. But if they realize here isn't good and they got to go over here, then I want them to be able to do that. I also want to make sure that they are enhancing all of their skills. You know, one of the best people that knows everything about an organization is primarily two groups. Auditors, your internal audit, but the second one is you. You know everything. And that's really important. You are valuable in that organization. And so it's important that they understand that and you display that, right? And so this helps everybody in your organization manage in a crisis. Because what I'm trying to do is I am trying to build resiliency through teams. And so let me talk to you just for a second about how I do that. So we're professional designers of exercises. but I am not an expert in the company that hires us. So what we do, and this sort of has been kind of funny because it's really developed over time. We actually use what are called exercise design teams. So I'm an expert in exercise design, but I am not an expert in the people who hire us. So we utilize the design team concept. So I have teams of employees in different categories that come together and they work with us to develop the injects to the exercise. I design the narratives, all of that baseline stuff, but because I can't make an inject that's highly specific, I work with a team of professionals in that company who can. Because my goal when an inject gets delivered in an exercise is I want people to look at it and I'm looking for the oh my God moment. We use real client names, it's real client issues, it's real. So when they get that, they go like, oh my God, that's what I want, every time. And so what's happened though, is that we have all these design teams, and often there's there could be as many as 15 people on a design team. You know what happens at the end of an exercise? They actually become ambassadors for your program because they understand it now. They didn't maybe understand it before, but now they do. So we have these observers that we have design team people that are actually carrying the flag for you. Then many of them turn into observers, or I pull in other people like business continuity coordinators. They become observers. They learn about the program more. Then I've got an army of people. So I have clients that have actually done this for many years, and they have a troop of people that get what you do. And it's simply because they help design a highly specific exercise, and that's super important. Okay, poll question number 1. I want to know in your design aspects of an exercise, how do you go about doing that? So, how will you decide on what you're going to do when you conduct an exercise? How does that happen? Number 1, my boss or other senior people tell me what they want. I want a ransomware, I want this, I want that. Well, you need to resolve audit findings. Is that how you actually come up with the topic or the narrative? It's a previous incident that didn't go well. It's the topic du jour, kind of like ransomware. Or you basically roll dice and you sort of figure it out. So take, a moment, answer that question, and then they're going to magically pull up those answers. Oh my goodness, you're so fast. So 25% of you actually, your boss tells you what needs to happen as far as the narrative. You're trying to resolve some audit findings as the 17%. 21% of you say that a previous incident that did not go well. And then 25 of you say it's the topic du jour. I can always tell, so funny that's actually very common. I can always tell if somebody's boss sat next to somebody in an airplane, and they went like, oh my gosh, are you doing ransomware exercises? And it's like, next thing you know, it's like, oh, we got to do one of those. So funny. Okay. I want to quickly talk about what I call the 2 critical questions that you need for success. So I think the most important question you ever have when you design an exercise is what I call the silly little question, which is simply, why are we doing this? Now, it sounds silly, right? Like, why are we doing this? But I'll tell you, you ask that question enough to the right people, it's important. It's not like a simple, well, why are you doing this? Oh, I want you to do a ransomware exercise. Well, why is that? My boss wants one. Well, why is that? Oh, because we don't know if our technology is going to be sufficient. Well, why is that? So essentially, why? Sometimes I throw in a few whats. And all of a sudden, I realize a bunch of things. Maybe there's issues in the technology department. Maybe they don't really have the kind of processes that they need. Or perhaps they might say, like, oh my gosh, we don't think the communications team has really got the right templates. Oh, okay, that's good. So now I've already learned a lot more. I think that this is the most important question you could ever ask anybody when you're asked to do a design. So I ask why a zillion different ways. I talk to 5, 6, 7, 8 people until I'm super, super, super clear why I'm doing this. Because it's all about listening. Don't make any assumptions. So I sit and I ask and ask and ask and ask and ask again. So it's like being a therapist a little bit, blah, 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 blah. But I know everything that I need to do because I spent a little time kind of rowing and hoeing in the field, so to speak. It tells me everything I need to know. It tells me what kind of exercise is going to deliver the best results. Is it a basic tabletop We don't do very many of those. Is it an advanced tabletop, which is simulated? Do we do something more sophisticated than that? It also tells me what the goal of the exercise is, and it tells me probably almost every one of the objectives I need in the design. It tells me the scope. Who needs to play in order to achieve the results? Super important. And it tells me what's the narrative that's going to deliver the best exercise. I learned all of that by asking the silly little question. And then it tells me who needs to be on my design team. What are the key categories? And then literally after several conversations, I can design all of this by that simple question. So I want to ask a question about how you design exercises, and these are your options. I do it alone. I'm a team of one. Our business continuity team does it. I use a design team of company professionals, kind of like what I'm talking about. Or you hire somebody to do it. So you have 4 options. How do you design your exercises currently? Okay, a team of 1. 56%, whoop, 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 whoop. 41% of you, it's dropping a little bit. 39% have your entire team do it. Some of you use a design team, about 18%. I'm happy to see that. Oop, 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 19. So a little adjusted here. And then 6% of you hire somebody to do it. Now, even if you are a team of 1, what I want you to think about is if you use things like design teams, you will enrich whatever you do. I beg, I really implore you to think about this. Because I know you're smart and I know you're bright, but you don't know everything. And there's no way you can design a highly specific exercise by that. Now, the other thing that's important under the 2 things I wanted to mention before art comes up is the idea of storytelling. An exercise is a story. I spend a lot of time making sure that the narrative of the story is airtight. I then also make sure with my design team that we design injects that are going to make people just have that oh my God moment. That is telling a story. And so when you look at storytelling, essentially what I'm looking for is the power of a story. We've all gone to movies and cried. We've all read books and been moved. I'm looking for my exercise to do the same thing. And so that means I am looking for this sort of intuitive, emotional response out of people. Sometimes they actually learn a lot more because it becomes visceral. Excuse me. People use stories to make sense of things, and that's the power that you have when you design an exercise. They're going to learn simply because of the power of the narrative and the power of the injects. But before they've done anything. That's what a good story is going to do. That's super important for me. And people learn from stories. It's one of the great tools we have to move people, to change behaviors. And we make sure that they are designed in a way that will make them act. So exercises to me are simply stories. It's all they are. It's like acts in a play, chapters of a book. And so I want people to understand, when I first do an orientation with a design team, I always say, okay, this is the deal. It's like we're all writing a movie play. We're writing a play, we're writing a series of chapters, but we're doing something and we're going to drop them in, kind of like the Matrix, and they have to figure out what they're going to do. So our job is to create that environment. So what you want is you want a story that's realistic, that's feasible, and you want something that really pushes the roles and responsibilities of the team and pushes on the kinds of things that you know need to be worked out. And by reading a checklist or a plan, you don't get any of that. But if I can make you feel it, and if I can make you have to do something, I can change that company's response. And that to me is super powerful. What I want you to think about is that you in this room, every one of you, has the power to do this. Every one of you. You have the power to influence human behavior. You have the power to develop critical thinking in your teams. You have the power to shape leaders. And you can build enterprise resiliency by a well-designed exercise, what I call the golden opportunity. Now, many of you might say, but Regina, I feel like I'm hurting cats all the time. Well, I know many of you might, but I want to give you a quick little look at that.
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family.
Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy.
Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs, well, that's another thing altogether.
Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here, and if you look at his face, it's just ripped to shreds, you know?
You see the movies, you hear the stories, I'm living a dream. Not everyone can do what we do.
I wouldn't do nothing else.
It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost a one of them, ain't a feeling like it in the world.
EDS, managing the complexities of the digital economy.
Oh, thank you. So that is, oh, thank you. You're so sweet. So that is what we do for a living, right? Cat herding. That's actually a very famous commercial from 1999 from EDS. So what I want you to think about is that you all have the power to do this, and Art Powers from Exxon is going to talk about how he uses that to actually change Exxon. Art, it's all you.
All right. Thanks, Regina. Good morning, everybody. I want to, quick poll. This is an informal poll. There's nothing to use with your phone for, but I want to see a show of hands. How many of you, as when you were younger, were involved in some organized activity, whether it's band, theater, sport, that required practice? Yeah, it's pretty much all of us. And if you're lucky, you're still doing stuff now. If you're, well, you can count your blessings if you're a parent and you've got practices all over town. Growing up, I remember practice as a kid. It was, you know, that call in the afternoon that made you stop playing or whatever you were doing because you got to go to practice. What are you doing this weekend? I got practice. We got to practice. We got the big game. We've got a concert that we're getting ready for. Whatever that is, you were constantly going to practice. And we learned early on that practice is the way that we develop ourselves and the skills for whatever it is that we're doing. If you're playing an instrument, you had to practice all the time. Oh, you get the question, did you practice tonight? So practice was really a key part of our growth in whatever that interest was. And at practice, we learned a skill. We learned how to do something that was part of your role on the team that you were part of. And then over time, you learned this is how I put my skills alongside my teammates' skill, and we can achieve goals that we set for ourselves, whether that's learning a play, learning a scene, a song, or competing in a match of some kind, right? It was always working towards some culminating event. And eventually you learn this from your coach. You know, when you were little, you probably had no idea why you were there other than it was fun to do it, whatever it was that you were doing. And then as it got more competitive, you started to understand the stakes more, and practice was a big deal. And if you didn't do well in that culminating event, you heard about it at your next practice. But this is all what we call experiential learning. This is how we imprinted lessons on ourselves so that we could continue to get better and advance at whatever we did. And if you didn't show up at practice, what would happen? Yeah, you didn't get to play. You know, practice, no play, because it wasn't a penalty. It might have felt like a penalty if it was you, but you weren't aligned with the rest of your team, right? And the team needs to be on the same page, and the only way that they get there is through practice. Early on, when I started getting involved in exercises in the professional world, there was something that I really enjoyed about exercise. It felt really, there was this feeling that I had at this work thing that I was at, and most of the exercises that I was involved in early on were incident management type exercises with colored vests, so ICS based. And so to me, we were putting on a uniform, and then we were going into this room that was set up for incident management and stuff hanging on the walls and people in officious positions doing things. And I just thought, this is really cool. This is like role playing. This is a game. I'm playing at work. And I actually came to start referring to what we did as Dungeons and Dragons. And eventually I learned that exercise the designer is the dungeon master. So fast forward to my career as I was working as a new supervisor at an operating facility. I had a responsibility for training my personnel in how to respond, and we had plans that we needed to test. And so I had an exercise program that was largely regulatory based, and I had to conduct exercises on some frequency. We had annual requirements, and I would have a work scheduler that would pop up and say, you have this exercise due this month, this week, whenever. And those were tabletops, they were equipment deployments, they might be just a simple notification drill where you're calling people on the phone to make sure that they could show up at work if you needed them in an emergency. Or there might be some more complicated full-scale exercise type evolution that we needed to do periodically, which is probably every 3 years. And I always felt like I wasn't catching something. Something wasn't quite right. And so what I would do is I'd go to my files, I'd pull the last year's exercise, I might find a guide that says, make sure you do this, this, and this. And most importantly, make sure you get everybody to sign the attendance roster so that we know that everybody was there. I'd pull out the plan and look at what the basics of our scenarios were to make sure we had that right. But again, it felt kind of empty and unfulfilling in terms of really engaging people. But nobody ever showed me how to design an exercise. It was, you got to do exercises, but nobody said this is how you develop your scope, your objectives, your narrative, your injects. This is how you bring creativity to create context, and I'll talk more about context later. But we had this sort of a lack of how we were doing these exercises creatively, at least at my level, was bothersome. And anyway, I continued on in my career, and I eventually became a full-time emergency management professional in the company, and I had some responsibility for a global response team that we have that's made up of all volunteers from around our businesses. And in a major emergency, we call them and then they mobilize to the event. And we would have exercises every year, a couple of them, and they're pretty large, they're pretty complex. We would call in a contractor to design these things. So we would bring in a specialist that could tell us what the exercise needed to look like. They would ask us, pertinent questions about what is it that we're trying to do, what do we have to do, and then they would build out the exercise, and we would have, our injects, we would have our flow. They would tell us what the schedule was, and then our role was largely, and my role in particular was the coordinator of the exercise. Came to be known as the wedding planner. So do we have a nice venue? What's the meal? What are we doing for schedule, and making sure that we stayed on schedule and making sure that all the right people were invited. We did have a lot of responsibility around stakeholder engagement, who mattered to be in this exercise. And that's a big deal for a lot of us, right? It's not only do you need to be ready to respond, but we also need to be able to demonstrate to other people, our business partners, our regulators, our local stakeholders, the communities in which we operate. They need to know that we're ready to respond. And I can come up here and say, yeah, we're ready. We got this, don't worry about it. Or you can invite them to an exercise and they can be, whoa, and see all these people doing their thing and like, wow, you really are ready. And the things that you're saying that you would do and the people that you have in the room, they're the right people for a response. That's great. So designing the exercises at that early stage, this is like 2014-15, it was largely engaging with the contractor, the consultant to do the exercise. And they would soup to nuts from the design to the implementation to the post-exercise report. They would take us through the whole thing. And consistently, it did the job. But I was always, one of the things that I was noticing was it was also always the same job. I was starting to see the same injects every year. And people would start to lament, am I going to hear that inject again? I always get that stupid inject. And that, I was like, haha, yeah, that's funny. But I cringed when I heard that because I'm like, yeah, I know it really needs to be better. But how do I tell my creative writer to be more creative? I don't think they got it. I just feel like I'm asking for something that's never going to come to fruition. So what I did was I started to really pay attention to how they were doing it and kind of pieced it all together. And then in 2017, I said, I'm doing my own exercise. I'm going to step way out into the discomfort zone, and I'm going to own this exercise. I'm going to design the whole thing and be the wedding planner. Lesson learned there. That was fun. So I started designing the exercise, learned a lot about how to pull together the injects. I looked at a lot of old stuff that people had used and kind of put this thing together. I think if I looked at the timeline of events, right, you plan this thing, and a lot of our exercises, we plan them way out in advance, right, because you got to get people's schedules open, make sure we get the venue that we want to have if we're going to have it at a hotel, or make sure that the site that we're working with doesn't have some massive project that's going to conflict with what you're trying to do, right? So you need to manage these real-world considerations. So we would have like 6 solid months anyway to design the exercise, sometimes even more. And one of the things that I learned early on was that you really need a system for how you design your exercises, because I found that probably 80% of the injects were written in the last 20% of the available time. No one's ever been there. I'm sure I'm outing myself as the only last-minute exercise writer. But pressure creates diamonds, right? So my first exercise came out very well. I got a lot of good feedback on it. And to me, that said, all right, keep doing this, keep doing this. And then I started building the context. Context was really important to me. And Regina touched on this. We're asking people to go from their day job, whatever that is, whether they're an executive or a manager or an employee, and they've got all the roles and responsibilities of their regular job, and we want them to jump into their emergency management position. And that's difficult. Actually, my original Dungeons and Dragons reference comes from asking operations responders who would be out physically responding to an event, who come to an exercise in a rough and tumble environment like this room, and ask them to tell me, how are you going to tactically respond to this incident? And I would say that I'm literally doing Dungeons and Dragons for jocks. These guys are like, I don't know what I would do, because they don't have mud, they don't have hills and terrain, they don't have the smell of whatever it is that they're dealing with. And obviously I'm referring to an oil spill type of scenario. And those challenges that they would be taking on, head on and successfully managing don't exist in the environment of this type of a conference-driven exercise. And so I started to really focus on context. And my background being operations was, how do I get my section to really get their head in the game? And so we started doing all sorts of things. Printed wall charts with laminate on them that you could write on with grease pencil so that they could mark up what they were doing. And we would put those in a room and say, this is a room that is just the field. So anybody that comes in this room, they have to stay for at least 30 minutes to simulate going to the field. Little things like that. We've adopted VR for some of our context. And everything that I've done, it sounds really fancy, right? I've used VR in our exercises. 360 camera, which was like $250, and then a VR headset back when they were about $300, and then put that on, and then somebody can say, oh, this is the environment that I'm in. Okay, yeah, I see the terrain that I have to respond to, and this is how I'm going to do things. So that was all DIY stuff that we were doing, and it made a lot of sense to people, and it helped improve their ability to respond. So this is what I was doing for several years, and then during the pandemic, during the lockdown, I engaged in what I refer to as Amazon therapy, and I would periodically order books so that I would have the excitement of waiting for something to show up at my front door. And I ordered a lot of emergency management books. There's a lot of interesting stuff out there, a lot of great authors. And along the way, I found Regina's book and the accompanying instructor's guide that goes along with it. And started reading through it, and I was like, this really resonates, because this is how I think. This is how I've been trying to put my exercises together. This makes sense. This is really organized. And so working with one of my colleagues, we started to talk about, all right, let's build our own program. Why don't we have more people that can design these exercises? And at this point, we had some feedback from our internal assessment groups that go out and assess the operational performance of our global operations. And they were saying that from an emergency response standpoint, exercises really weren't that great. And I knew that there were a lot of people out there, just like me when I had first started, that didn't have good instruction on how to do exercises. And I was like, yeah, I wish they had something. And I'm like, dude, that's your job. It was my responsibility to make sure that they had these tools to do this. Now, it wasn't a stated responsibility because no one ever thought about it, but I thought about it. And it was like, I need to do this. So we started working on putting together a program that would train all of our global emergency preparedness and response advisors in how to conduct effective exercises. And it looks like I have a poll question. So this question right here, what do you want to know about exercise design? Do you want to know how do you organize your actions against the timeline of the exercise, which could be a complex thing? How do you build support for management to put more into the exercises, kind of overcome reluctance to fully commit to something that's going to really be impactful to your organization? Do you want to know how to write injects? How do I come up with good injects? And then the ultimate, you're not really sure what you want to know, but you just know you want to know more. Did I just click the button? No. Back. Back. Okay.
It'll magically appear.
Boom. There we go. Look at that. Neck and neck. Let's give it a second. See if anybody wins. There we go. How to build support for management. It's nice to see that everybody really knows what they want to know. All right. These are a lot of questions that I had, and that's why I wanted to ask you, what do you want to know about exercise design? And so what we're going to talk about, is I want to talk more about what we did to pull this program together, right? I can tell you about exercises, I can tell you war stories about different things that we've done and different gimmicky things and how I think upgrade injects. I will say that my favorite term, and we've heard this on TV advertisements, ripped from the headlines. Ripping things from the headlines is a great way to actually develop a good exercise. Truth is stranger than fiction. So whatever crazy idea that you might have about a scenario or an inject or a turn of events or an escalation within your scenario, it's probably happened. And it's probably happened even more bizarrely than you could even imagine. So creating the course, what did this look like for us? This was all about training. How do we build a proper training program? And it's like, how do I take the whole body of knowledge and experience that we had for exercise design and just pull it all together? And that's where we were really struggling to make something that was cohesive and made sense. And what we found with the instructor's guide is it gave us a logical method for putting all of the things that we needed to impart into a logical flow. So what we did is we assessed what it was that we were trying to teach. We wanted to teach people how to design exercises. We wanted to teach them how to design exercises for any kind of scenario because we experience all of them from crisis management, what we call a strategic response, so things that are impacting us from the outside world, and then the tactical response, which are things that we create that we need to respond to physically, right? So that's kind of the quick and dirty method of describing our approach. So we looked across our organization and we said, who needs this training? Who's our audience for this? And we have emergency preparedness and response advisors, either completely dedicated or partially dedicated in that role, scattered all over the world in all of our different business lines. So we had a pretty big audience of people that we could approach. And we had a huge level of management support to do this. So we had the blessings to go forward and build this course out. One of the things that I do want to say about our decision to do this ourselves was that what we lacked in our original approach, where we had a lot of contractors writing our exercises for us, is while they did a really good job and they got the job done and they were consistent and I needed it done and I picked up the phone and they did it and it lightened the load on me, it also, one of the things that was lacking was that intimate knowledge of what your company culture really needed. And it also prevented the growth of your team by putting yourself on a course of discovery where year by year you're building your team forward, right? So I have a new team this year, and so maybe I start small. We just shake them up a little bit. And then next year we think about what are those areas that we really needed to focus on, because we had some all-stars in the public and government affairs group, and they really did a good job with messaging, but the incident commander needed some more focus on setting the objectives and controlling the room. Okay, so let's focus on that. And we extend a little bit there. And then, 3 years down the road, it's like, let's do it. Let's get, 100 people, 200 people together. Let's make it really big, huge. And so by controlling the exercise design ourselves, we were able to really work on those areas much more focused and in the context of our company. So back to creating the course, and kind of keeping all this in mind, we started to build out a program that consisted of PowerPoint presentations for each module, and we created 5 modules, and each one was about 2 hours long, or that was the meeting time for the sessions. And one of our methods that we adopted from the pandemic was something that we were learning from our kids, which is the reverse classroom. Does everybody know what reverse classroom is? So reverse classroom is the instructor, the teacher, the professor, they send the lecture home, and the student watches the lecture, hears the teaching, so they do their studying and they get the lesson, and then when they show up at class, they're able to go deeper into the topic and do stuff. Conversation, activities, whatever. And so that's what we did. We basically took our PowerPoints, grabbed the microphone, and I sat there in a quiet room, made sure that nobody was coming to visit so my dog didn't greet them. And I recorded these things, and then I would send them out to my class a week in advance. They would listen, and then they would provide their they would show up at class, and then we would focus on questions. We had discussion questions, people would work through the questions, and then we would have a opportunity to work through an exercise activity. And each session that we ran, each of our cohorts, at the start of it, we would ask everybody to bring a scenario that they wanted to develop, and then the team would vote on it, and then those people would whoever got their scenario chosen would benefit by the end of the session by having an exercise that was at least partially done. And so we delivered these things over a course of 5 2-hour sessions, and we've delivered this since 2021. Okay, poll question. How did you learn how to design exercises? Was this a course of study that you took? Was it self-taught through trial and error? Is it outsourced, or are you still learning? All right, a lot of self-taught folks here. Love it. I actually have a master's in emergency management, and after I got that master's, I still didn't know how to design a good exercise. I knew a lot of acronyms. All right, self-taught is our clear winner, but still learning. We could probably just put 100% on still learning, right? Yeah. So I'll assume that everybody else, you're all still learning as well, so that's great. Not a lot of outsourcing happening. Okay, so what can you do? What does building a program look like for you? And I've kind of touched on some of the high points as I was talking about our own. You need to determine what your program needs are. So how big is your company? What kind of risks do you face? What's your responsibility for response? How do you want to train people? So just kind of get the scope of what is it that we're trying to exercise to, right? So you probably have an exercise program, and that would be the first place you would look is what is my exercise program addressing right out of the gate as your starting point. Get your stakeholder support for building out the exercise, because you're introducing a training program at a in your company or your organization. And so you need to understand that your stakeholders are going to be in one of two camps. It's going to be the, yeah, we're good with DIY. We'll accept your DIY approach, and yeah, let's do this. We get it. And then you have the, your time is really valuable, so just bring in a contractor to take care of that so you can devote your time to something else. We'd rather pay a contractor to come do that. So there's pros and cons of having the consultants designing your exercise, and there may be cases where you may want to have a partial engagement with them, but just understand what the position of your stakeholder that's going to be supporting you, your sponsor of this program, will be. Identify your student base. So do you have a cadre of emergency management professionals in your organization that you can reach out to? Is this going to be the kind of thing that you're going to deliver once and be done, or are you going to be doing it on an annual, some recurring basis? And are you going to potentially be looking at people that don't do emergency management all the time, but they're interested because, as Regina pointed out, maybe they're part of exercise design teams previously and they want to learn more and do more. And then finally, your syllabus for the course needs to be customized to your needs, right? What are you teaching? How are you going to teach it? How are you going to deliver it? We've done all of ours virtual. One of our challenges is scheduling, because we have people in all the time zones. So when we run the course, we run a 6 a.m. that covers Europe, Africa, Middle East. Then we run a 12 p.m., which covers the Americas. And then we run an 8 p.m. that runs for Asia Pacific. And that really inspired me to train other trainers. Because that's a long day and a lot of talking. Talk about herding cats. And then finally, creatively deliver the course, right? Creativity is the hallmark of a good exercise design program. You're going to be asking these people to design creative exercises. So you need to come in with creativity in the way that you teach them. So that's the way that they go forth from your program and say, yes, I need to be creative. And these are some of the fun and interesting things that we can do that are going to grab the attention and shift the mindset of the participants in that exercise that I'm creating. So making your design delivery course, the delivery of your design course, exciting and interesting is important. So learn all the adult learning techniques. Think about how you're going to practically apply this thing, and really make this as exciting an opportunity as possible so that you can send people forth as designers that are enthusiastic about what it is that they're doing. And then finally, what we've learned in doing this ourselves, right? So we've been doing this for several years now. We have about 170 or so people that have been through our program around the world. And we've had a lot of good feedback from our people that we've trained on what they've been doing. But we've also had feedback from people that have been part of their exercises, which is the most important feedback that you're going to get. And what we've heard is that there's a better level of consistency of what people are delivering. They're much more realistic and they're much more engaging for the participants. From a continuity preparedness standpoint, we had an interesting exercise last year that it was a corporate level cyber response. So it was a big company-wide, corporate-wide, worldwide, big red button moment type scenario. And planning that out, what we decided to do was we selected strategically located businesses around the world early in the year, and we told them, here's your scenario, this is what we want you to design. And they, using our method, and these were all students of ours, they built out their exercise at that business line level. What was the impact to them of this attack? What were the things that they needed to be dealing with? What were their issues? And what were those issues that they needed to elevate for additional support? And then fast forward, we collected all that information, and then when we ran our exercise for the corporate team, these were our injects. So they were actually getting real stuff from the businesses that was like, oh, okay, yeah, we hadn't thought of that. Because it was actual things that other people had thought of, and that just kind of created that snowball effect of, this is really what would be happening to you. You're not managing at that high level, you're supporting. And this is the support that you need to be giving. So you don't need to fix the problem. Other people are trying to fix the problem. How are you supporting the problem fixers? So that was a really good opportunity for us to kind of pull our cohorts together and our alumni of our program and really, see what we could do on a much larger scale on a worldwide basis. And then finally, the consistency, the people development. I feel like I'm going back to one of Regina's slides. It's a great way of improving the readiness of your teams, no matter what kind of response that they're going to be involved in. This is really, response readiness is what we're looking for, and it's teaching people to practice like they play all the time, so that when the big game comes, which we never want to actually happen, we don't want to be on Broadway, we don't want to go to the Super Bowl. We're not looking for any big games, but if they ever happen, we're ready to respond to those. Thank you.
Let's give another round of applause for Miss Regina Phelps and Art Powers. They must take this golden opportunity, as we're told, yes, golden opportunity to build successful exercises so our teams can be engaged. Again, Regina will have a meet and greet right outside for a book signing in the foyer, and we're going to take a quick break, and we should return here back at 9:15. Thank you. Are we ready? All right, let's go. Just waiting for my next, keep going, keep going. Here we go, thank you. All right, our next session is called Navigating Business Continuity and Third-Party Risk. So I want to welcome our panelists. We have Margaret Millett, who's a subject matter expert. We have David Halford of Fusion Risk Management. We have Terence Lee, or Terry for short, from ProTech Group. And we have Renuka Darbha from Pure Storage. Please welcome our panelists.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Margaret Millett. On behalf of Renuka, David, and Terry, I would like to welcome you to General Session 8, Navigating Business Continuity and Third-Party Risk at DRJ Spring 2024. I know the next hour will fly by with insightful information for the attendees to use back in the real world when you get back to work. I think our session is timely just based on what we heard from our previous two speakers, and maybe we should have had the order reversed on our sessions so that you could really maybe leave here with a headache after we had done our session to talk about what's happening with third-party risk. And we don't have a formal poll, but what I'd like to start and do is maybe ask people to raise hands if I ask at your organizations if you use third-party companies for the following: staffing, IT, whether it be data centers, application support, physical security. What about food services, cleaning, getting supplies? So I'm assuming by now, no one's not able to raise their hand that they don't use a third party to do something at their organization. And I think the other thing that's really important when you think about third parties at your companies, do you know what are your top 10 vendors? And what are they really? Because of most organizations, how are you even defining the top 10? Is it the amount of money you spend? Is it the services that they provide? And I think that's one thing that's really critical that organizations need to know, because most organizations will say, hypothetically, it's the folks that we get the data center from. Well, that's your biggest paycheck. But is it also then really your customer service center, which may be something that's really important because that's where you're getting the input from your customers? So one takeaway that I will have for you is really start to think about, do you know who are your top vendors from what you spend per year versus those that support your critical services? Because I always joke at companies, I want to make sure that when we're having a disaster that we're still going to continue to get the services like you want to have, but what are the ones that you really need to have? We all know that suppliers, customers, partners, and other third parties may expose your organization to a myriad of regulatory and reputational risks. And you need a streamlined approach to mitigate these threats. You may also notice that some of these third-party examples have overlapping risks, such as reputational, compliance, or financial and operational. And we know that an effective third-party risk management program should address all these risks and should be agile for future risks that could be unfolding. Our panelists are going to share some real-world solutions towards a clear path aspects of risk management, including screening, data, and due diligence services. Terry, what are drivers behind vendor risk management and business continuity management in an organization, and what are the activities required?
Thanks, Margaret. Good morning, DRJ. Is everybody awake? Everybody stay out too late last night? Thanks for having me. Let me ask you a quick question, show of hands. If your organization was not required to do business continuity or third-party risk to satisfy the regulatory requirements, would your organization do it? Do you think they would? How many do you think the organization would do it? Are you just saying that because otherwise you wouldn't have a job? Really? Okay. So regulatory requirements are the number one driver for most types of risk and compliance management, but sound practices and good business practices are the other reasons. And I think the changes that we've seen in the regulatory environment, banking, financial services tends to be the most regulated environment on the planet, so they tend to go first. Healthcare probably second. But I think some of the shifts that we've seen are the way that like the Bank of England and their operational resilience requirements and standards are starting to permeate other geographies. Canada's OSFI organization has operational resilience standards coming out, and just this week the OCC said we're thinking about an operational resilience standard, which frankly I think will be very good for our industry working together. So the regulatory requirements drive a lot of the business. I mean, you could do what we do on paper, you could do it on spreadsheets and office tools. Your life would probably suck, but you could do it that way if you wanted to, just because the data and the volume and the interconnectedness between it is really complicated. But I think when we consider those regulatory drivers, you know, the intention is to make us better corporate citizens, it's to make the companies better, it's to make the companies stronger. And I think really, at least in America and financial services, the connection between third-party risk management and business continuity in particular is in all of the regulatory requirements. They don't have, for example, a particular standard yet for operational resilience, but I think the way the Federal Reserve addressed it was by sound practices for third-party risk management, information security, and continuity.
Terry, I like how you said not yet, meaning we know that once one country implements a rules and a regulation, chances are that it's going to be the domino effect that will be adopted by other countries, and it's just a matter of time. And so that's where I know I was talking to somebody here at the conference, and they were talking about DORA that goes live in January in EMEA, and they were saying that they were already starting to look at that, how it might be coming to Canada, and then chances are if another large country adopts it, it'll then just become standard for all of us in some form or fashion. I'd also have to say in my time here at DRJ Spring here in Orlando, we've heard a lot about AI and cybersecurity, and we know that those are topics that some might say, oh, we're talking about them again, but yet we know those resonate with our executive leadership, and so as continuity professionals, we need to be able to make sure that we're fluent and able to answer those questions, not only for our leadership, but for auditors, customers, clients, et cetera. So I think we're going to go a little bit deeper on what those concerns are and how we can maybe help you feel more comfortable addressing this topic as it relates to third parties. Renuka, what are some of the unique risks presented by greater reliance on AI systems?
Yeah, thank you, Margaret. So a couple things. I've embraced AI, especially in my programs, and especially within the third-party risk management side. You have, I mean, think about how we used to do things, spreadsheets, right? Just manual intervention always. But with AI, we're able to get through contract due diligence really quickly. We're able to do risk assessments and risk scoring. So there's some really good opportunities there. However, there are risks. One of the key risks that, at least what I'm looking at, is reputational damage. When you have failed data models or failed outcomes that are biased, that's really where you have to worry, and that could lead to other issues, especially with reputational issues. There's financial implications, legal liabilities. There's, of course, compliance pieces that come along with it. A couple of things around the compliance, right? If you're relying on the AI tooling for your third party for decision making, and that goes in another direction, think about all the impacts that it could have across your processes and all the other decisions that you have to make. So that's a huge risk for us. And then finally, cybersecurity. I think everything leads to cybersecurity risk, right? So this is one area we have to really watch out for.
Thank you. Also, everyone, please think about some questions for our panelists today, and please put those in through the C-Event application that you have already on your phones. I know everybody's got them. Hopefully you haven't deleted them yet. David, what are the key challenges organizations face when it comes to managing third-party cybersecurity risk? And how do you think these challenges can be effectively addressed and mitigated?
Thank you, Margaret, and like Terry, thank you guys for letting us be here and be a part of this event. I know I certainly enjoy it, and there's a lot of opportunity to share. Specific to, obviously, to your question, you're going to hear a bit of a theme from me as I go through, and it's a little bit of who I am and my experience working with clients. But from my point of view, the first thing that is at risk for you from a cybersecurity perspective is, in fact, the entire model that you use to onboard and understand the vendor and your third party, and the processes that you go through in each of those stages. I may have an opportunity to describe those stages a little bit as we go through, but most often, as an example, the team that is bringing the third party in is going through the due diligence process associated with contracts and agreements and information and things like that, and then that is happening as a result of an operations team going out and obviously finding the vendor, the third party that they're wanting to use or the type of third party that they're wanting to use to actually do the work. And so from my point of view and my experience, those things are disconnected. The data is disconnected, the information is disconnected, and so as a continuity professional, your ability to look at what that is that proficient all the way through, and are you missing things, and how current things are. And again, we can talk more about what are some of those data points, but the first one I'll say is, even if you're doing it with systems, the concept that, and most companies, my data says 50% of you are still using spreadsheets for a significant portion of your work, and so therefore the data can't be, literally it's very difficult to make that connected between the. So that's the first one for me. The second one is during that process, the concept of understanding what the vendor is, how that is being used from a data perspective, how that vendor is being injected into and being executing as a part of your business. And I'm going down the route, I think, Terry, again, I'm echoing him just a little bit, but the concept of what risk does it apply, excuse me, it was Margaret when she opened up, right? What risk does the vendor actually apply, represent to you versus how much money they've spent, or whether they are the largest company that you're working with. And the question that was asked around which one's your most important vendor, I almost never get the risk-related answer, almost never in the conversations. And I think that's a risk for our customers. For our third parties, and it's clearly a risk for our operational teams. The last thing I'll mention is, and this is unfortunately ties with our first session this morning, but the real lack of ability to test with your vendor, test with your third party, and it being an active participant kind of model that allows you to really tilt the edges of the flow of information. So, for me, those are the three key things, and fundamentally, I can go through some ideas of how to do and solve each one of those, but it starts with acknowledging and recognizing each one of those things I just mentioned, and going down that path of solving them. Sounds simple. I know it's not as simple as that, but that's the main directional point.
David, two thoughts came to my mind when you were speaking. You always think about how much you're dependent on that vendor, but in the vendor's mind, where do you fall in terms of their criticality? Because again, we've talked about the financial aspect of what you bring to that vendor. So in their mind, are you one of their top 10 customers? And so I think that's a question that's often overlooked, is where am I in the order of priority? Because if they're having an event, when are they going to notify you, even though you have designated client teams from them? I think that's a takeaway that I would offer to everybody. And David touched upon testing. Not every vendor is going to agree to conduct an exercise with you or a test. And I think that's something that you really need to be mindful of when you are negotiating a contract or doing a contract renegotiation, is that a clause that's in there so that you can state that you have to do an exercise or a test, and that it has to be successful. And if it's not successful, who's determining what the criteria is for being successful or not successful? And then what's the amount of time before they have to go do a retest? Because I know that typically if you do get to do a test with them, they want to charge you for it. But if it's an unsuccessful one, are they going to come back to the well saying, hey, by the way, you're going to have to pay for that again? So these are some language considerations to think about for your contracts going forward. So thank you very much on that, David. Terry, we know many organizations have a risk, a vendor management risk team, and a BC team, a compliance team, the list goes on and on. How should vendor and BC teams in particular best work together to ensure the resiliency of the organization?
Thank you, Margaret. How many of you as BC professionals or third-party risk professionals are tightly integrated with your enterprise risk or compliance programs? Okay, probably a little bit less than half. Yeah. I think, and in my experience and our customers' experience, the best way for these teams to be successful is to work together from a common set of information and a common set of data. We see BC teams sitting in one of two general places on the org chart, either under or part of enterprise risk, or if the organization is more focused on digital transformation and digital risk management, then that business continuity team tends to sit in the CISO's office or somewhere within the IT organization. As organizations grow, the natural tendency is to create silos, and these teams end up working independently of one another, and they're using and referring to the same data: risks, controls, business processes, business units. Especially when it comes to third parties, the third parties are providing some kind of a product or service to the organization. What is happening within the organization? That product or service is being consumed by the organization within one or more business processes or important business services. And all these risk and compliance teams have the same vested interest in protecting and ensuring the resiliency of the organization. I feel strongly it's the business continuity professional's job to ensure the resilience of the organization through testing and exercising and planning and drills, because I don't know who else in the organization is going to do that type of work in general. Having the same set of information, speaking the same language in risk and compliance is the best way for these organizations, silos, to come together. Many large organizations have multiple systems. That's okay. You can have multiple systems, but you should still be sharing the foundational information that's needed to make risk and compliance related decisions.
Great point, Terry. And Terry also echoed on another thing that we've been hearing at Spring 2024 DRJ, and that is silos. We cannot be successful as teams working in silos. We need to come together, and we need to understand how we are interacting with the vendors, and also making sure that we're information sharing. I think another thing that often sometimes goes unnoticed is looking at what have been some root problems of services and products or performance with the vendor, and who's then really looking at, hey, is it just my team? Because if it's products used by multiple teams, have we been capturing that information? And I think sometimes another partner, Terry touched upon enterprise risk management, but I also think internal audit is a good team to go look at too, because depending on the charge of that internal audit team, they also may be looking at some of the third-party things as part of their audit purview for their plans for reviews in the future, because if it's a large enough vendor, they may want to understand how critical it is and what's the inside scoop on that organization. So,
can I add one more comment
Sure.
to that? I think the going back to what David said about phases and processes within third-party risk management, the place that these silos tend to come together is during the vendor onboarding process. When they're conducting due diligence, send out an assessment, and they request that the vendor provide certain artifacts. Send us your SOC 2 report, send us your business continuity plan, send us your financials. In many organizations, when those things come back, they either send them to the respective subject matter experts within their organization. You know, for example, if the bank has a BC manager, then the bank's vendor risk team sends the vendor's BC plan to that person to comment and assess. And so in that onboarding process, many of these teams come together, at least to comment and look at it. But onboarding isn't the important part, guys. Yeah. Onboarding is a moment in time. Sure, it's important because that's where you're looking for risks associated with doing business with the vendor, but the monitoring is the hard part. The monitoring the vendor to make sure that they are going to provide products and services on time and within RTOs is the harder part. And that's when we tend to see third-party teams really start to go back into their silo from a monitoring perspective, because they're doing ongoing assessments and monitoring, but they're not necessarily linking back out to the risk and compliance teams or the audit teams, although in my experience nobody wants to talk to audit. So
yeah,
sorry.
Great points, Terry. And I think another thing to add on to that, and we'll get back to more of the questions, is keeping an eye on the vendor. We live in a world where financial instability is a little bit more commonplace than we care to think about. And I think the other thing is we always have to be mindful of mergers and acquisitions. I mean, I'm in my 30th year of the business continuity profession, and I look back on who was once here and who's no longer here, and that's just within our realm of business. You go look at other vendors and products that are out there. It's just a world of mergers and acquisitions to acquire, grow, that type of thing. So I think that's another thing that somebody has to be keeping an eye on that in-house on behalf of your organization, and who's going to be the one that's going to say, hey, the ABC company today got bought by the 123 company. How's that impacting our products and services? So, David, could you please share with us what are essential components of a robust third-party risk management program, and how can organizations ensure that their program is comprehensive and effective?
Thank you, Margaret. As I mentioned earlier, I've got a bit of a theme in the way that I think about this, and you're going to hear a little bit of an echo from what Margaret and Terry both just described. But for me, I got 4 bullets that I want to share with you. The first one is tied in exactly the same as the way Terry described this concept of the overall process. I mentioned earlier that these things are done in silos, and we've talked about that silo here. The concept that data, that process is not disjointed, and so to have this successful program working through how to get the information from that onboarding part all the way through to the actual implementation, and then that continuous monitoring. We're talking about it like it's a real simple thing to do, and often, unfortunately, there are completely different organizations involved in many of those steps. And so the concept of actually having the information flow and the tool you're using flow the information so that you can have access to it and see it. And I have the view, as Terry described, that you don't have to use the same tools, but you do have to have the ability for them to talk to each other and move information back and forth. And it's really not acceptable, again, you're asking, Margaret asked opinion, it's not acceptable for that way of it being passed back and forth, being spreadsheet and a Word document. I don't think that's functional for a company that's got 8,000 or more, making up a number here, but that's the average that you see. And then tied with this is the concept of that risk nomenclature, that risk measurement model, the idea that what's critical and how it's measured, and again, if we're using a different system from the risk management system, the concept of those numbers and the way in which that's calculated and the way in which your business recognizes it really needs to be consistent, or your metrics are not going to be right. They're going to be all off. I think so that's my first one. And again, we're looking at this concept of really stepping back as a continuity professional and in fact interrogating how that actually works. So that's, from my perspective, that's a recommendation that you go and learn how it works, and then make judgment for yourself how disconnected it is. Unfortunately, I promise you, unless you've done this, it'll be disconnected. The second one for me is the process in which we use most often from a continuity perspective is we are looking at what vendor is supporting my service or my process, and we're putting a level of criticality on it based upon how important the process is. And that's important. That's obviously part of it. We also have to look at what other things cause it to be critical. The kind of data that third party has access to, the level and the ability of them to measure, and the way that their cybersecurity functionality is measured. So internally, you have tons of tools set in place to measure a data movement and who's in it and how long they've been in it and all of those kinds of things. Does your third party have that? And how is that done? So the concept of operationalizing how you measure the vendor's risk to you, again, a little bit of an echo from my previous discussion, is the next piece of the puzzle. And then Terry mentioned it. The concept of continuous monitoring, and how do you continually monitor? From my perspective, the concept of doing an annual survey to ask questions about what's changed, what issues, where they are, that's great, but that's not continuous. That's not continuous monitoring. And so again, deploying a methodology for that continuous monitoring, and a sort of a best practice model that I have seen is this combination of, can I figure out a way to have monitoring tied to the way I'm doing testing with some of my most critical vendors? Little creative concept there to make that be part of that puzzle, but those are really some of the main things that I would describe.
Thanks, David. You touched about the risk model, and I think it's really important as continuity professionals is don't reinvent the wheel. If you go into an organization, figure out if there's already a risk model that's being used by another department, hopefully your enterprise risk management team. Use that and adopt that, because the other thing that you want to make sure is when you start to report the risk to leadership, you're using that model so that, for example, if it's on a scale of 1 to 3 or 1 to 5, you're using that so that when you start to talk to leadership about the risk, you're not then saying, I don't know how to answer questions, because the leadership is used to that model that's already been in existence, and then they're looking at it like, I've been asked to compare apples to oranges, but I want to be able to compare apples to apples, and so therefore make sure that you're providing them with something that's already familiar with them, and if it needs to be enhanced, work with that team to figure out if there's another category that needs to get added due to what you're seeing out in the marketplace. Renuka, how should organizations update their resiliency and third-party risk management strategies to account for risk related to AI disruptions?
Yeah, so I think the theme here is continuous monitoring of your third parties. And also, when things happen, if a disruption happens, even if it's a small glitch, see how they respond, look at their behavior patterns. Are they reaching out to you proactively? Do you need to reach out to them and constantly bug them? Those are the key things that you should really try to look into. But when you look at what we do from a resiliency perspective and our integration with risk management, whether it be a third party, whether it be ERM or so forth, there are things that it's really important for us to really understand and put together as part of our practice. Really embedding some of the AI pieces that you know are risks for your organization and conducting risk assessments around those. Those are going to be the key to all of this, because it will set the stage, give you the baseline of what your organization really should be looking at. And then specifically also, as BC professionals and what we do, we have to, incorporate those scenarios within our exercises and our planning. That is also going to be one of the areas that, at least for at least my organization, we are putting some emphasis on those, because that essentially is going to give us that wide range of scenario planning. So, for example, if there's a AI-related governance issue or data poisoning issue, those are the things that we want to target. So at least we're covering all of those aspects together collaboratively with all the teams. And as I mentioned before, testing is definitely the key, but also looking at it from a data privacy perspective, because there are going to be some compliance implications that come out of this with data protection laws. So how are you and legal and security all working together around those, and how can we better prevent those is going to be another area.
Thank you. Renuka, do you feel that AI is, well, it's not new, but there might be less mature on the continuity aspect because there's more startup type companies. Do you foresee any education and training and getting them up to speed on what's going to be required for a company to say, this is what we want from you to be, a good valued partner?
Absolutely. I'm already seeing a trend actually with the new ISO standard that's out, the 42001. If you haven't read it yet, you might want to just take a look at it. There's really some good areas of how to incorporate a proper AI management system in your organization and how to guide you through that. I think that's a really good starting point for people.
Great, thank you for sharing that ISO. There's a plethora of ISOs out there, and to be able to rattle them all off, that would be an accomplishment for somebody right there, because they've exploded over the years. David, how can organizations establish a clear and enforceable cybersecurity requirements and standards for their third-party vendors?
Okay, so these are, sounds a little easier from my perspective than they are to do, but the first one for me is really, it starts at quite frankly, at the agreement process. I want to back up. I've told you my pet peeve, if you will, of those three main things I mentioned, so I'm not going to do those again. But the concept of starting at the agreement process, you guys as continuity professionals, working with the procurement team to be sure that the agreement has in it things you need, the teeth you need, in order to be able to manage that relationship. And Renuka mentioned it, but she mentioned the concept, but one of the ideas that I see really working well is when you define particular standards that you require the vendor to the third party to have, and then in the contract require them to prove their currency with that particular regulation. So that's just an idea, but there's other ones. And then the next one is a little different too, but the concept of the way we have our employees and our most of us, if you will, connecting to and getting into the information from us. So as you're sharing information with your vendors, they have to have access, in most cases, very similar to your employee base. And we don't often, it's not as common to have as rigid a requirement on the third party as it is the employee, and which is amazing to me. But making sure that that's in play as part of the model are a couple of things that I'd mention.
Thank you. Okay, we're now going to take Terry and we're going to put him into a theme park, and we're going to have him fast forward 5 years from now. And we'd like to maybe get some insight on what he thinks risk and compliance organizations are going to look like.
5 years?
Well, whatever you think is the right horizon, Terry.
Well, when I think back to what risk and compliance organizations, in particular business continuity and third-party risk teams, I think back to what they looked like when I kind of got into the space.
Which was just yesterday, right?
Which was like 20 minutes ago.
It's when you got back from Australia.
Yeah. I walked. How many of you have been in BCM or third-party risk or the role that you're in? How many of you have been in that role for more than 10 years? Okay, so about half the room, a little bit less than half. I think the way the organizations have evolved is they have come more together. They moved away from, 15, 20 years ago where I believe these organizations' roles in BCM, third-party risk in particular, and even compliance to a certain degree, they were really siloed and they were doing it because of regulatory requirements. And I think they've started to come, not started to, because they've been doing it for a long time, they've come more and more together. I think the hard parts are still hard. Like in a particular function, whether it's risk, compliance, BCM, or TPRM, do you understand what the regulatory requirements are? And in particular, things like risk appetite within the organization. How many of you would say you firmly understand your organization's risk appetite statement? Nobody? There's one. Give that man a Ferrari. Nobody? Lisa, did you raise your hand? I didn't see you. Love your t-shirt, by the way. That's part of the problem. Your organization has a risk appetite. Every key risk has a risk appetite statement, and every one of those key risks has thresholds. Call them high, medium, low, red, amber, green, whichever you wish. When the organization's key risk indicators say this is a problem, this is becoming a problem, or this is red alert, this is really a problem. I use it as an example because what we see in BCM and TPRM in particular is that risk appetite setting and the use of key risk indicators doesn't permeate your teams. It doesn't permeate your organization. And why not? How much risk is your organization willing to take with a third-party vendor? That ties back to risk appetite statements. If you want to learn more about us, wow, what a coincidence. I'm doing a webinar next week on risk appetite and third-party risk management. So 5 years from now, maybe we'll all be laying on a beach somewhere outside of Orlando. I think that the maturity of using risk appetite statements, key risk indicators, is going to trickle across BCM and third-party risk much more clearly and much more consistently than it is today, because I think that's going to make the organizations more resilient.
Great, thank you. Renuka, I'd like to circle back with you about standards. You mentioned the new ISO one. How do you foresee emerging regulations or standards around the use of AI for resiliency? And how do you think those compliance requirements are going to evolve in that area?
Oh, it's definitely going to evolve in the data privacy side. Get in touch with your legal office to understand what they're also concerned with. There are definitely trends that we're seeing emerging from other parts of the country and around the world, but it will trickle down even down to our own resiliency control. So we have to be very proactive on how we approach that, and we have to think through. We are the risks experts at the end of the day as well. So wherever you're seeing potential areas that we can maybe put a little bit more controls around or standards around internally, we can prepare and get ready for those eventual regulatories that will come down our way.
Yeah, I think, don't quote me on the story, but I think there was just something in the news recently this past week where there was a ChatGPT on one of the airlines and they said something and they had to give out refunds based on what was stated in there. So I think this is where Renuka is saying, really work with your legal department and understand some of this, because somebody needs to be monitoring that, because if it says all of a sudden do this, do that, and you get a $200 credit or whatever the circumstances was, that's important, because somebody needs to be monitoring that, because that's going to create another round of chaos and response, and it's going to be at its own little mini crisis that's going to need to be mitigated and responded to. And then also tracking how much AI might be costing the organization due to these hiccups.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
So, Terry, talking about shortcomings, when organizations manage vendor risk in BC outside of an enterprise risk team, what do you feel the risks are?
Going back to some of the comments that Renuka and David made earlier, I think the biggest problems tend to be consistency in the measurement and the reporting of risk in business continuity, vendor risk. If you're not working with an enterprise risk team or you're not working closely with the compliance organization, you're probably speaking a different language or you're using different metrics. When the organization, think about compliance. compliance teams, they want to be able to answer the question, are we compliant? How many of you have ever heard or met a chief compliance officer state, we are not compliant? Yeah, that's a resume generating event. That doesn't usually happen. And believe me, they have other terms for we are not compliant, like our compliance is evolving. Yeah. Right, sure, right. And so I think there's a mismatch often between the metrics and the actual determination of, is it risky to do business with this vendor? Are we at risk in our ability to actually recover? Do we know if we can actually recover in the event of a disaster or some kind of an incident? So I think the biggest problem is that the languages differ from each other.
You're right, and I think that people also look at risk differently. We have a set of risks as it relates to business continuity management. Physical security is going to have another set of risk. The IT team is going to have another risk. So it's making sure that we all understand what risk is, because it means different things to different stakeholders. David, you engage with a lot of clients in your line of work. What are some lessons learned or success stories from organizations that you have worked with that have effectively managed third-party cybersecurity risks that you're able to share without naming names, of course?
Well, yeah, that's the tough part. I think that I've got a lot of war stories, and I love talking about them. It's one of those kind of things that we all do, right? And so without telling the whole story, both of these are situations that I was directly involved with or had participation with. And so I'm going to do two, one a negative one and one a positive one. And I hope that they give you an opportunity to maybe take away the thought. But on the negative one, working with a large firm, and without going into all the details of how we got there, the question was posed based on a large data warehouse that had all of the company's information, all their customers' information, and again, I'm trying not to go into too much detail, but the customer information was regulated based on the kind of information that it was, and et cetera. And the question was posed, who has access to this data, and how often have they been accessing it? And that was just a simple pose of a question, if you will, that came out of a planning exercise, and a relocation was actually an activity of, I don't even want to go that far. It was a fairly low-level activity of a question, and the company could not produce that. They couldn't tell me who is accessing their data and how often. I mean, what's the regularity of that? And so I wrote it up, and I escalated it a bit in the company, and within a very short period of time, they had a major data breach. Unfortunately, as a result of, and they couldn't tell where it came from, et cetera. So, what my point with that one is, on the negative side, is I do now know a big number of companies that actually make that as part of their activity. Sounds pretty low level, but if you from a technology side, understanding who's using the data, do you have the things in place, and this sounds like 101, but this wasn't that long ago, for that occurred. On the positive side, again, I'm going to go kind of tactical and a little bit simple, but we all have an issue. I mentioned earlier about how do we do creative and testing with third parties, and so this company, very good, very large firm, and they could not get their vendors to sign up for basically anything because agreements and size of the vendors and all of those kind of things. And so they put a process in place where they basically had a team that would essentially go get to know and interview their top most critical vendors, and connected a relationship like an account manager between from the technology perspective and the team perspective in that vendor. And over a period of about 9 months, they got 80% of those vendors to allow that person to observe and actually be internally a part of their exercises. And it was phenomenal kind of change that it made, in the team. And it was all done with relationship. The agreements were not sufficient and apparently it was one of those they didn't feel like they could even get them sufficient enough to do that. So those are a couple of examples. I could go down a bunch more, but those are two that I thought might be useful for you guys to kind of think about and take back with your teams.
David, I think you've touched on a very valuable point of continuing to have a relationship. The relationship is not just at time of contract signing or renewal. It's making sure that it's embraced and maturing over time, because like you've also heard with public-private sectors, you don't want to be engaging and getting more familiar with them at the time of an event. It's something that you should, who are you going to call? We all know that organizations change, so do we have the right players on a call tree, or not a call tree, but know how to go notify, know who to go email. Same thing with the out party. Who's there today? People come and go with jobs, so do you have the right people so that you know who to go contact? So that's a great takeaway. Our time is starting to wind down, so if you have not put your questions in, please do so. I'm going to turn to the panelists and ask each of them to please share one takeaway that they want you to leave here with. So Renuka, if I could ask you to kick off that question, please.
Sure, absolutely. So if you don't know who your critical vendors are, please go find out, right? And then take it a step further and ensure, if you have a list of critical vendors, ensure that your vendors know that they are considered critical for your organization, and establish a relationship or a some kind of understanding of, if something should happen, these are the expectations we have to respond and to maybe react to those types of situations. It's very key, otherwise, we'll be making assumptions, and then, one thing leads to another, and we're looking at a big crisis. And I think the whole point is we want to avoid getting to that point.
Renuka, I like what you said, and I think another thing that organizations need to understand is, what are your hours of operation? I mean, most organizations are global, so again, disasters don't happen Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. What happens if it happens at 5:01 on Friday? And also, if you have operations in other parts of the world, Sunday could actually be kicking off Monday activities in another part of the world. What do you need to do in order to help mitigate that so that you have a successful start to that workday in that part of the region of the world? So thank you, Renuka. Terry, what is your takeaway?
So I think an ongoing challenge in BCM and third-party risk is understanding if the product and services provided by the vendor to the organization fall within the recovery time objectives of the processes that are consuming those products and services. How many of you in BCM are looking at recovery time objectives of the process related to the vendors, products and services that are being provided to that process? Are you examining it? Yeah, it's a very small amount. And I think that leads to a false comfort that if something goes wrong with the vendor, we'll be okay, we'll recover because we exercise the business continuity plan for the business process. But without understanding, maybe even at a contractual level, the vendor's contract might say they must provide the product within 3 business days. But if the RTO of the process is 4 hours, and that is a critical vendor, guess what's going to happen?
Got a huge disconnect.
The vendor goes away, you've got a serious problem. So I would encourage you to dig in and understand the data behind the products and services that are being provided. How does that translate into a contractual commitment as a service level agreement? And how does that align to the RTOs of the processes that you're supporting?
And we haven't even touched about the third-party companies and their fourth-party support. That's a whole other topic that maybe we could all come back on and talk about at Fall DRJ.
Yeah.
But to take us home, David, what is your thought?
Yeah, I'll go back to one I mentioned earlier, and that is I'd really encourage you to go back and take 2 steps back and look at and analyze the process that's in place today for third-party risk management in your organization. And that starts, as Terry said, from onboarding. It goes through to obviously the testing and the cyclical view of continuous monitoring. In my experience, there's it'll end up being 5 to 7, but the version of it I like, there's 6 big chunks of that. And so I'd encourage you to go back and analyze how's that work and who's all doing it, how's the information back and forth, and just look for places in that conundrum of a process to add connections and add ways to mitigate risk.
Thank you, David. Okay, so now we're going to open it up to questions. Our first question that we have received are, what are 2 actionable ways we can engage with vendors annually for joint testing in 2024? What has worked? This has become a required recommendation in many frameworks. Who would like to take that question?
I'll start.
Thanks, Terry.
Well, too bad. You're not going to be able to get them to come to the table. No, I'm kidding. So, as David mentioned earlier, it starts at the very, very beginning. It starts in procurement. Does your standard contracts have language that says the vendor's going to be tiered, and if you are of a particular tier, call them tier 1, of course, then you must participate in an annual exercise with us. So to 2 actionable ways. One is, of course, make sure that it starts in contracts and procurement and that it's there. The hardest part is going back to the contracts that have been in place for a really long time, because when you try to add that language to an old contract, most vendors say, oh, no, I don't want to do that. If it's going to distract us, but it's important to your operation. And the other thing is, it's a relationship. Your vendors are, sometimes vendors think that you want them to participate in a test or an exercise so that if something goes wrong, you can beat them over the head with that. You're counting on the vendors. You have a contractual relationship. It shouldn't be an adversarial relationship. And you have to communicate that to the vendor, that I'm counting on you and I'm not questioning your ability to recover or provide your products and services. I'm counting on your ability to provide those products and services. And testing and exercising is one of the only ways to really make sure that it's going to happen.
Okay, thank you.
I'll give you a couple of additional points, if that's okay, based on the timing here. Well, it looks like we got another question, so why don't we...
All right. Well, Linda Pace, thank you very much for that question.
Yeah.
Our next question are, why are questionnaires to vet a third-party vendor the default way to assess them? Shouldn't there be a better way?
Should there be a better way? Yes.
Well, I'll make a comment on this one. Is I think there should be, certainly, because one of the things we see, I see as a real pain point for folks in this space is really the fatigue of questionnaires and the fatigue of just managing them and doing them and keeping up with them. So I feel your pain. That this is one of those things that most definitely is painful. There are other ways, and so I know that there are several products out there and vendor solutions actually that will analyze your network of vendors in a systematic way and give you ratings and score ratings and security ratings and liquidity ratings and customer usage and satisfaction ratings. So I'm seeing a high people doing it a lot of technically going and having those kind of services tell you a rating, a risk issue for vendors, and using that to help you put them in a category to go do that test. So I'd like to think that we could get to the place we could analyze information and understand the validity of that vendor externally, looking at it from that data perspective. So that's kind of the other way and the other thought that you could consider.
So I'd like to add to that. I've worked at companies where I've had to answer the questions for the third-party companies that engaged with us, and it's a litany of questions. And I'm just talking about for business continuity, never mind identity access and cyber, et cetera. But then sometimes when I've worked with our third-party team to go get the answers to the companies that we're going to go engage with, they're like, well, we'd like to keep it to like 10 questions. And I'm like, it's really hard to know whether that's a sound business continuity management program when you just ask 10 questions. And again, question and answer fatigue on questionnaires. So I highly recommend that you answer the right questions yourselves and make them yes, no. Like, do you have a crisis management plan? Is it updated annually? Do you exercise it? If you get it more easy, and don't combine 3 questions into one, because they're going to only answer the first question. So really take the time to break it out. Hopefully, if you just have it so they just zip down, say yes, 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 hopefully all yes, no nos, you'll get the answers much easier. So that's something to think about. So our next question, did you want to add to that, Renuka?
Oh, I was just going to say there's AI models.
Yes, 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 yes.
So you can make this easier on yourselves, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Excuse me, our next question comes from John Bigelow. As McLeod provided guidance outlines the need for documented exit strategies for critical vendors. How should we look at too big to fail providers like AWS? Is no short-term exit strategy sufficient?
Well, because Renuka didn't raise her hand first.
Yeah. All right.
I'm struggling with this one.
I don't, there isn't an easy exit strategy. You could plan for it, like switching from AWS to Azure. The costs in most organizations are going to be astronomical. And in particular, unless you're going to run parallel systems in parallel environments and the syncing that goes on between them at a tremendous amount of money, there's no hot swap, throw the switch if AWS is unavailable, and now we're running in Azure for most organizations, because they simply can't afford it. So I think there's mitigation strategies. Where's the data? How's it backed up? And in particular, do we clearly understand how we get this process up and running again in the absence of the technology or the people or facility that we particularly or a vendor that we particularly rely upon, and have we exercised it to make sure that we can actually do it? But I think you got to do the analysis and lay out the costs associated with it. But good luck getting it approved.
I'll add to Terry's. I'm sorry, Renuka, is what you described. There is a risk acceptance, there's a risk evaluation part to this conversation.
Absolutely.
Right? And that guidance does in fact say you need to have an exit strategy. But just like all guidance, honestly, and this one is in fact guidance, there is a risk factor associated with what you're talking about, right? Yeah. And whether or not it could be extremely high risk, but as a board, as a team, as a company, have you decided to accept that, and document it? So anyway,
Yeah, and I was just going to say, at least in my world, we are embedded across all the big players when it comes to cloud, and it's not that easy to do, and I feel it is what it is. We just have to figure out ways to get better about our compliance asks and needs and ensure it's incorporated.
I think another thing is to have a playbook for if you need to quickly change vendors, that it's already documented and that the players know who needs to get involved, because there's going to be some special fast tracking of things that normally have to go through the due diligence of things that can take weeks, and you might need to do things in certain days. So who's going to be the one that's going to be, shepherding these things through the systems for approvals and legal contracts, et cetera. So if you don't have that playbook, that may be something that you want to consider as a takeaway. Our next question is for Matthew Lamoureux. What AI tools can be used for contract due diligence and third-party risk assessments?
So we actually have something in-house that we've built. We're playing with it. In fact, we're piloting it internally. But there are plenty of others that I've come across that are pretty decent. But it's more about if your company allows you to have a public version versus a private version. There's things that you have to consider. But essentially, think about it as these are the key things that are pain points for you when it comes to risk assessments and how you're looking at it, and even little things like how you want to score it and tier it. There are ways you can do that now with existing AI tools, but if you really want to get more deep into it, I definitely recommend you talking to the folks in your organization that are maybe building something internally or already have something to play with.
I'll add, like Renuka, we have some things we're doing in-house and working on with our product, and the concept. So 2 concepts. One is the idea of having the system, AI systems, search through and look at and ingest all of the different vendor agreement information and looking for missing items and using it to understand the quality of what it is that you've gotten. Again, this is ours is in-house, kind of model, and I think we're going to see more of that. A tool to tell somebody to go get and implement, I think, is really not something that I think you could actually just go buy it and plug it in. It doesn't work quite like that, right? It's but it won't be long. It won't be long before you can do that.
If I could just add one thing to it, this is obviously a hot topic to everybody, I'm sure. We did a webinar a couple of weeks ago on AI and the risk of AI, especially in models used by organizations. And not surprisingly, it was probably one of the highest registration count we had for a webinar in the past couple of years. It was like 2,500 people registered for it. It was pretty crazy. Wow. Our co-founder, David Tatum, when he was preparing the material for the webinar, he told me that the perspective that he took on AI was, I'm going to think about AI as an employee of my company. I'm not going to think of it as a piece of software. I'm going to think of AI as an employee of my company. Now, what do I expect of that employee? How do I want them to behave? How do I want them to communicate with me and other people in the organization? And it really changed the tone of the webinar, because people were asking questions around behavior and communications and things, rather than just, it's a software tool and it's consumed all the content on the internet, and wow, you can just rely on it 100%. You never have to question it. It's so great.
Wow.
It's not. So.
Well, thank you for that closing comment, Terry. On the four of us would like to take a few minutes to ask you to complete the online survey. Also, please feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn and connect, and we're happy to answer any questions that we may not have gotten to in today's session. And we look forward to seeing you at future DRJ sessions. So thank you very much for attending this morning.
Thanks, everyone.
Another round of applause for our panelists. Wonderful guests. Thank you so much. Okay, so we have another coffee break. So it's currently, 10:16. So please be back here by 10:30 for our final session for the day. Thank you. All right, before I introduce our final speakers of the day, I want to remind you to complete the survey following this session for a chance to win a free pass to the 2024 conference or 2025? 2025 conference, okay. So 3 passes will be awarded and the winners will be notified on March 27th. So make sure you fill out that survey so you can get into the drawing to win for spring 2025. Spring 2025, geez. Okay, back to where we're going. Back to your regularly scheduled program. Okay, so our final session today is artificial intelligence and its impact on disaster recovery and business resilience, presented by Richard Cocchiara, yes, and Peter Quinn. Richard Cocchiara is an innovative and goal-oriented IT executive with proven track record of accomplishments in planning, developing, integrating, and implementing secure, cutting-edge, cost-effective IT solutions and services for companies and governments. He has held several positions of leadership at major companies and government agencies, including Chief Information Security Officer at the New York Department of Education, and CTO of IBM's Business Resiliency Services, where he was named an IBM Distinguished Engineer for pioneering the business resilience approach. He currently serves as the Managing Partner for CXO Enterprise Expertise, where he uses his skills in disaster recovery, business continuity, IT management, risk mitigation, and cybersecurity to help clients improve their resilience. Peter Quinn is a seasoned professional with a track record of driving transformation initiatives, rescuing struggling projects, and revitalizing underperforming IT organizations who believe it makes acts of inevitability a reality. His expertise has earned him the role of CIO of the state of Massachusetts and the New York City Department of Education, as well as a trusted advisor to C-suite leaders and senior government officials. He currently serves as an executive partner at CXO Expertise, where he is passionate about helping organizations thrive in today's complex business landscape. Please help me welcome Rich and Peter.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, DRJ. I love presenting this day on the Wednesday. Why? Because I know that you are the hardcore, dedicated people who are here to learn. And I happen to know that we stand between you, Mickey Mouse, the airport, or lunch. Or all three. Either way, we're going to try to get through all of this. Now, understand also, this presentation is designed, I know you've all been hearing about artificial intelligence for 3 days. You're going, AI'd out. Okay? This is going to help you to start to utilize AI. AI is happening. It's a train coming down the track. So either you're on the train, on the platform, or on the tracks. Our goal is to get you off the tracks, off the platform, and on the train driving it. Okay? So, a couple things. As Lisa said, Peter and I worked at the New York City Department of Education. He was my boss. Okay? I was a CISO. So I would have to present to him all the nifty new ideas that me and my department came up with. I had responsibility for disaster recovery, business continuity, security, governance, compliance, all that. Peter had responsibility for everything. So we're going to talk a little bit about AI and how you could use it, what you need to do to get ready, and he's going to talk to you about the basics, the things that you have to do before you even think about it. Because, I tell you, you just don't want to go headlong into AI unless you're ready for it. So, we also wanted to pre-announce something because everybody out there has got something. So, our company kind of worked really hard, like all the tech companies, and we're here to pre-announce the AI washing machine. Okay, I didn't get any kind of a laugh on that one at all. Okay, because if you heard about it, look, the last couple days you've heard AI, right? Everything's AI. Every vendor's talking AI, everything. So I was around when we started e-business, and I knew we arrived when we had an e-business toaster oven, right? That's when you know we've arrived. Well, we've known we've arrived because we now have an AI washing machine. The AI washing machine is kind of cool, right? It's got a sensor that's going to check to see what your size of clothes are. If you're like me, depending on a few pounds, it will do a few things for me. It's going to lock my refrigerator at 9 p.m. And then it's going to go ahead and sign me up for a health club. The nice thing, it does communicate with the AI refrigerator. Now, it also has a smell sensor. Some of you may not like this, because it will detect, you know, kind of perfume and cologne that's not normally there. But we've included a remote turn-off feature, so you got that, okay? You can do that. And then it's got a sports sensor. Anybody here in insurance? You're gonna love this. It's gonna call your company and tell you about all the crazy sports that I'm doing. And it'll adjust my life insurance policy. Pretty cool.
So this is pretty good stuff, right? Well, I'm going to link this with AI. And if we're talking about AI being infallible, let's talk about its lack of infallibility. If I remember correctly, when I got suspended in my senior year in high school for smoking in the boys' room, I think the spelling of this word is tobacco with an O. All right? You get this making reservations. Now, to me, is I'm thinking about this a little bit different. I can use this and prevent the verbal fisticuffs that go on with my friends trying to where we're going to do reservations, and this can be an arbitrator for me. Given the number of fashion faux that we have around today, this could help society in terms of what's going to happen in teaching you how to dress. And because of AI again, if you look at the last item, I sense a little bit of masculine bias embedded in this, and maybe we can get this to neutralize and be able to recommend the Food Channel or Home Network or Lifetime do something different. Richard. Actually, you jumped ahead, so I want to stop here for one. No, it's good.
Wait a minute.
I want to stop here for 1 second.
There is supposed to be a polling question.
Yeah, no, it's not a question.
Okay.
Here's what we want to do. We're going to give you a little different perspective. I'm going to speak to you as a 6-time CIO, and when I look out across the audience, all of you people would actually have reported to me. And you've broken my heart all week when I've heard about you can't get things done because you got management that won't allow you to go. You can't get teamworks to work together. And I want to talk about how we apply some of the lessons that I've learned about how we're going to make this different. So the perspective is going to be a little different than you've heard from all the other people. You had Art and Regina today talk about methodologies, about what they do and how they do it. I'm going to talk much more ground level about things, about how you can get things done, how you think about things differently, real things that I've done that actually help you go. And Richard is going to give you a perspective from a CISO standpoint. And I'll just say one thing. When he came to work, I gave him responsibility for data in addition to being the Chief Information Security Officer. He spoke to the FBI, and they said, that's brilliant. That's not brilliant, ladies and gentlemen. The last time I saw hackers don't steal your secure gateways. They don't steal your servers. They steal your data. So there's a natural synergy about giving it to him and having him take it. All right, so so we're getting right into this. All right, so all about AI, all right? There's a bunch of myths about this, so let's just talk about these. It's going to replace all human jobs. If you've listened to the commentary here, everything has been collaborative. It's helping enhance us what we do. It's helping us do things we don't want to do, parse through data in a way that we can, work on things that we don't. But I want to give you a little different perspective. If you thought about computers in the 70s and 80s, they said it was going to replace all the jobs then. The names that were around them were Digital Equipment Corporation, Computer Vision, Data General. They're all gone. Look at the industry that we have today. Who would have thought 40 years ago that would have spawned the things that we have? Who would have thought that you would have 600 people in the audience with the discipline around business continuity, disaster recovery? It's completely different. I'm very optimistic about what AI is going to help us do. One more point about the job loss. If you're looking at the declining birth rate in China, Japan, the United States, and Europe, We are going to need this to help support our economy because we are going to have an imbalance of labor as we go forward. We're going to have too many people that are retired, not working, and not enough to fill the jobs. So this is pretty important. AI is conscious like human. Consciousness is about self-awareness, I-ness, emotions. It can simulate it, but it can't be it. So don't think about that. Dystopian future, how many people watched the news yesterday or last week? You're worried about the future? I'm worried about today, all right, to be perfectly frank. But I would say to you, the one thing I do worry about is surveillance. We have so much data right now. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal 2 weeks ago. The United States government is buying commercial data from commercial purposes, and they're aggregating that to watch on, to do whatever they do with it, and God only knows what that is. So I would worry about and think about that. AI is infallible and unbiased. It's built by humans. The algorithms are built by humans. If they build their own biases in there, if the feedback loops goes with data that is already tainted, it can't be unbiased. It's done by humans. So we have to pay attention in terms of how these models go. It's going to achieve superintelligence and bypass human intelligence. Speculative and debatable. I would say to you that's an exponential trajectory in the way this stuff works today to think that that would happen. Independent of human control, humans build AI. All right, they monitor it, they fix it, they correct it, they enhance it. It's under our control. I don't see that going away very soon. The last two I just want to put together. If you listen to the conversations here, there was a number of folks that talked about how they're using AI today, individually, not as corporations. So the corporations, yeah, you know, we got Alexa and we got Siri, we got language translators, we got navigation apps. But we had Melissa Munez talked about, she used to do her Thanksgiving dinner. It was, let me find his name, Chris Hurst talked from OnSolve. It's the partner and tool that he couldn't afford to buy before. It does things for him that he doesn't want to do. So this is in many ways, it's just an enhancement on that. All right, first poll question. I'm worried about AI that'll replace me. Definitely, somewhat, no real opinion, not really worried, not at all. What do we get here? Well, look at you guys. You're not worried at all. So I think that's pretty balanced, and I think that's also pretty realistic about what it is that we're seeing here. Oh, I guess somebody is very worried they're going to lose their thing. No real opinion? I doubt that. Not in today's world. Rich.
Okay, so let's talk about how it's going to be useful to us in the industry, okay? Because that's really important to you. You want to know how you're going to use it. A couple things that I think it can help with, the predictive analytics. We're already seeing it. AccuData was here this week. How are we using it to predict weather? We've been doing that a long time. We've been using it to predict it. It's getting better. I'm more concerned about, hey, it's predictable, but is it predictable in the proximity of my enterprise? So predictable analytics. Early warning systems. Early warning systems, I know you're thinking early warning being disasters and things like that. What about your IT? Everyone seems to forget that, you know what? Disasters come in many, many different forms. It's not just a disaster you're worrying about. It's not just a cyber attack. It's worrying about something as simple as a change going wrong. So early warning systems that help you do that. Automated incident response. We all are looking for this. We want this thing to take a look and automate some of the things that we're doing today. This can help us in our industry because I know that when Peter and I were at the DOE, when something happened, I'm going to have to write up the incident. I'm going to have to make sure that we could respond to it and people are communicated with. This can help automate that. Data backup and recovery. How many times have we done data backup, then we find out we added a storage device to the array and it no longer matches our data backup? This can help detect that and determine what it is. Are you in sync? Are you actually automating? Are you compressing things? Are you taking advantage of the disaster recovery capabilities of your company? That is something that AI can help with. Communications. Back in the DOE, we had to put out communication in multiple languages. Think about that. I send out a communication, it could be up to 20 different languages I got to put it out in. This can help to automatically take that communication, send it out to the right people, make sure it goes to the right language and in the right context. okay? So it can help to do that and help to do it quickly. I know that when we had disasters, it was always, okay, let's write the communication, let's figure out what it's got to say. Well, if I had that automated, I could say, it's this type of a situation, send it out. Don't get people talking about what it might be. Resource allocation. In a disaster, how are you going to allocate your resources? They're critical. They are absolutely critical. So how are you going to optimize it? Who's going to get what? What facility is going to get something? Who's going to be moved around? This helps to do that resource optimization. We've all been talking about the cybersecurity and the threat detection. As a CISO, I took full advantage of this. I wanted to automate it as much as possible. Why is that? We're talking about millions of attempted hits. I once presented the chancellor and I had to explain to him that last month we had 1.2 million potential incursions. Please understand the size of the organization Peter and I were dealing with. The Department of Education in New York City is the largest school system in the world. 1.3 million students, 1,800 schools, 150,000 employees, and 400,000 parents. That's what we're dealing with. Okay, every one of them has the ability to access the system. So we dealt with disasters, and I'm saying, when you have 1.3 million kids and you've got that kind of information, Peter said I was the chief data officer too. I had data going back 75 years. I was able to find my father's high school records from 1944 in the system. Okay? So that's the kind of things we're looking to protect, and people are constantly trying to get at it. Somebody once asked me, who are you more concerned with, the teachers, the students, parents, administration? I said students. Because if they get the access to the critical information on a student, that student will not know they've been hacked for potentially 10 years. When they go to apply for a loan and they find out their credit is destroyed. So cyber was always a big thing for me. Realistic simulations. We know we can use this now to create real simulations. When we do testing, we want to put people in that simulation. We want them to experience the stress of having to make those decisions, right? We were talking at breakfast, and they were saying, hey, look, I had to make sure that the auditors, I'm sorry, I don't know if the young lady is here, but we were talking about the auditors, and she was saying, there she is, right back there. She was talking about, you were talking about the auditors, and the fact that they said, I want you to come up with a simulation that is multiple scenarios, all going on concurrently. That's a great exercise for AI. And then post-incident, looking at all that data and trying to figure out how I could potentially get better. So, what I'd like to do is now ask you a question. Are you using AI? Okay, my company on AI technology solutions for disaster recovery, not using or assessing it, reviewing possible usages, implementing AI for disaster recovery, and currently using an AI solution for disaster recovery, using multiple AI solutions. I want to see where we all are. Okay, not using, got a lot of people. Reviewing. Okay, we've got a couple of people now implementing. That's good. I'm sure the vendors that were next door are going to appreciate that. Okay, so you're looking at things. Okay, you are looking at it, and that's good. You should be looking at it and taking a look at how you could potentially use it. But you need to be educated in it too. This is not for the faint of heart. You're going to have to utilize that tool and figure out how it fits in. Okay, anyone else? I guess that's good. So, how do you get ready for it? You need to know this. Okay? You're going to have technical skills, domain knowledge skills, and soft skills. Okay? On the technical side, you kind of need to know a little bit about AI and machine learning. I am not saying that you all have to go out there and become AI experts, but you got to understand the technology and what it can do. How you're going to use it. You can't use it if you don't understand it. When my people used to come to me and say, I got this gee whiz tool, if I didn't understand the basics of it, I couldn't determine how it was going to fit into the overall architecture and then explain it to this guy over here and justify it. I had to kind of understand it. You need to know a little bit about data science, okay, which is basically pre-processing, feature engineering, model evaluation. Again, you don't have to become an expert, but you do have to know a little bit about it because it's going to come up. Programming. Some of us were programmers many, many, many years ago. but you have to understand a little bit about the programming languages, particularly like Python and those things, why they can help you to analyze massive amounts of data. Big data technology, Hadoop and a few of the others. How are you analyzing that amount of information? It's critically important that you at least understand the basics of data, big data. Cloud computing, we all kind of got it. There's nobody here that probably doesn't have the basic understanding of cloud computing, which is good. And then geospatial analysis, right? We're all taking a look at different facilities that we might have. When I was looking at it from 1,800 schools. Where they are, what are the different risks that they might have, and then what could potentially affect them. So I was looking at how do I analyze that. So those were some of the technical skills I think you need to have if you're going to be in this arena. And then the domain knowledge skills. You've got the domain knowledge skills. Now, I'm going to add to this list, because I got disaster recovery, emergency planning, risk assessment, regulatory compliance. I'm going to add IT management. You need to have a little bit of a basic in that. You need to understand compliance. As Peter said, I was a chief data officer. I spent a lot of time with the chief privacy officer, who was an attorney, understanding what are the requirements, what are the regulations, what data do I have, and how do I protect it, and when can I destroy it? Yes, when can I destroy it, which I never got a clear answer, and that's why we have 75 years of data. When can I destroy it? Because the more data you have, the more risk you've got. The more you've got to protect, the more you got to restore. So those are the kind of things from the domain knowledge.
So in communication skills are probably the thing that'll advance your career more than anything if you're very fluent on it. You're seeing AI used today to help written communications, help you get a little more succinct about what it is you're doing. But if you can't say it, and it's your words in a way that are believable, it's going to be a problem. And AI can't solve that problem for you. Problem solving is something that I think has been so lost in our industry and in business in general. I have a little thing that I learned a long time ago, and it's systematic problem determination, and it breaks down this way. What is it and what is it not? That's stupid English, I will tell you. But I am telling you, time and time again, I have taken and worked with people to solve the most complex problems by using that simple analogy. I spent 5 years working for a state CIO doing nothing but fixing bad projects. They had one particular problem that had gone on for months. The vendor had spent thousands of hours trying to solve the problem, and the problem was they were making payments to providers. Some were too much, some were too little. I got 4 people in the room. And in 4 hours, we solved the problem. It's not because I'm from Boston and I'm wicked smart. It's what we got on a whiteboard. And we said, what is it and what is it not? We came up with 3 scenarios. We tested them, we verified them. At the end, the problem was solved. AI is not going to be able to do that for you, and you should be helping yourself do this, because in the heat of the battle, you're not necessarily going to have AI to help you parse through and think about things as they go. I'm going to talk a lot about leadership, about how you can get your things done, but leadership and influencing practices are very important. You heard Regina and Art talk about this before. Can't overemphasize this enough. Adaptability, this is my simple thing about adaptability. Pilots get in a plane and do the same checklist. When they take off, they never see the same flying conditions. I always have to adapt. The biggest adaptation in the airline industry happened 15 years ago. They were starting to have more frequent plane crashes. So what did they do? The government and the airline industry got together and they set these 2 tenets. Number 1, you reported your own mistakes, and number 2, you could report security or any other type of problems that you saw without any type of retribution whatsoever. Since that time, 15 years, and I would tell you there was no fatalities, but apparently there's been one. I can't tell you why they attribute it to it. But we have flown 100 million miles and 10 billion passengers without a plane crash because they haven't had retribution. Contrast that with what's going on in Boeing, all right? The airline industry adopted, Boeing did not. We're talking about manufacturing versus what people were flying. Now, ethical awareness, I have 5 management tenets that I ultimately make it organizational tenets wherever I work. The 4th one is do the right thing. This is not something new. There was a movie in 1986 called Hoosiers. It starred Gene Hackman. It was about a basketball team in Indiana. The real story of that is in a book that just came out. I haven't had a chance to read it. It's also called Hoosiers. It's about an all-black basketball team in segregated Indiana at the time, 1954, that won 2 state championships. It was Milan High School. If you're a basketball person, you recognize that the leader of that team was Oscar Robinson. They had a coach. His name was Ray Crow. He had 2 tenets that he guided things with. The first one was, be right without fear. But the second one was far more important. Unfair victory is bittersweet. Let me repeat that. Unfair victory is bittersweet. We have to have ethics. We have to do the right thing. And I want you to always continue to think about that. All right, next slide. All right, and when I talk about basic IT management, I'm talking about anything that goes on in the thing. And I'm talking about BCP, I'm talking about DR, I'm talking about traditional IT, whatever it is you want to talk about. I'm talking about the whole thing. The first step in resilience is if it don't get broken, you don't have to fix it. Now that may sound very, very sarcastic, but if you sat through Robert Fernandez's presentation yesterday morning, he talked about the basics all the time. What happens? He talked about two-factor identification. We put it in, we make you use it every time. Well, people grumble about that. All right, you have to do it once a day. Oh, they grumble about that. Now we're doing it once a week. Oh, they grumble about that. Pretty soon your basic security practices have deteriorated to the point where they have no value whatsoever. So yes, I'm being sarcastic, but if you look at so many of the incidents, you can find the root cause. It's because somebody didn't do a security patch. Somebody didn't upgrade firmware, didn't do an application patch. Somebody didn't do their job. Somebody used the same password. All right, it's basic. If you stick to the basics and you religiously and rigorously follow them, you're not going to have the problems that we have. I also have one big worry, by the way, about AI, and it's complacency. We're going to trust it and we're going to get lazy. Just like you do, I have two-factor authentication, but if I'm only doing it every 6 months, you don't have any policy of security whatsoever. And he also talked about Orange, Spain, that had the credentials that were stolen and it sat there for 4 months. They could have discovered that, but somebody wasn't doing their job in terms of doing the interrogation of what it was. Next slide, Rich. So I'm going to talk about some very practical things that happened. Now, I was at DOE 2 months. When we came to DOE, and Rich would tell you this, we didn't have any business continuity, we didn't have any disaster recovery, there's a whole bunch of things we didn't have. But this happened about 2 months. 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, we have a power outage. The CTO and I were in a different building. We go over, everything seems to be under control. They got a whiteboard, they're doing all the command center stuff, they're doing everything looks fine. We go home at 11 o'clock. The next morning, I opened up a voice bridge. I have to say this to you folks. Every time there is an outage or anything that I'm trying to recover, I always open up a voice bridge. Why? God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, and 2 eyes and 1 mouth, and that's the correct proportion. If you sit and listen, you will hear and learn so much. So I'm sitting there at the house, and I'm listening, and you could tell already. Things are like getting crazy. Things are just a mess. You can see it in the voices. You can hear in the tonality of the conversation. So I start to make a few phone calls. I poke around when I get to James. And James says to me, they're running around like chickens with their heads cut off. Everybody's doing this, everybody's doing that. There's like no order, there's no anything. I said, who has the documentation? I don't know, but I got it at home. Okay. Everybody on a call, shut down the whole thing. Everybody go home. Go home. And the people are like, no, go home, just go home. Come back in Sunday morning, everybody in this conference room. I had whiteboards all the way around, portable whiteboards, regular whiteboards. The rules of engagement, and always when I'm engaging with people and we're going to do something, I always am very clear about the rules of the engagement. The rules in this case were what the major steps you're going to do, who's going to do them, what time are they going to be done. And the way this is going to work when you actually get to go and start doing it, when you finish a step, you have to call in and check it off. All right? Now, I just did 4 things, whether you realize it or not. The first thing is now I can see the whole composite of work. I know how much time, I know what kind of resource, I know who's doing what and where. The second thing I did as part of this is I said, everybody look at this and tell me what we're missing. I have now obligated, as a second thing, made everybody accountable and responsible to each other because they all saw and looked at the same thing. And everybody nodded their head and said, yes. All right? Then I sent them on their way. The third thing you did is eliminated as much as possible the misunderstanding of oral communications. This is my overused and old analogy. I said mother and you said mother. We both said the same thing, but thinking about two entirely different people. The last thing is the rules of my engagement is if I was doing a system upgrade, moving a data center, recovering from a thing, nobody can leave until everything is done, and that includes the backup. Every single time I've let somebody go, as soon as they walk out the door, I've needed them. Now, the thing that happens, though, when you've got everybody there, and they all want to go home, everybody will now start to pitch in and help everybody else. You're creating teamwork, all right? It's just another way about how things get done. All right, next slide. A couple of updated things that have gone on. AT&T network outage. If you're on this in February, you know about it. This is the quote. Application and execution of an incorrect process using expansion. How many expansions have they done and how many years? It was a mistaken coding. We've lost the basics about how it is that we think and check on things. A very important point when you're negotiating with people and you're trying to convince people to do something, that number, 214.5 million people. ABC said it was 100 million users. Which number is more believable? It's not this one because it's larger, it's this one because it's specific. If you're doing presentations, you're trying to convince somebody to do something, use precise numbers. It's extremely important. And you can see the cost effect of that. Now, I put this in there to anchor the time when this has happened, but I think everybody in the world saw all the Teslas in Chicago that couldn't charge during the winter. It was on every news channel, all right? My friend sells GMC cars, and he had sold an electric Hummer. Now, if you don't know anything about Hummers, they have these big, humongous batteries that do all the work, but they still have the small 12-volt battery like internal combustion gasoline engines. It wouldn't work. Same cold weekend, everybody said, well, it's got to be because it's cold. Some backyard mechanic did a jump start, put cables like you do in the internal combustion engine. Starts to charge. What's that all about? What was the issue? The issue was, again, a bad software update. Now, if you think it's just IT, you think it's just in the business world, how many people know about the Major League Baseball uniform see-through pants? All right? For the folks that don't, they've been making baseball uniforms since the late 1800s. So now they have a new one, and they're working with Nike. So now desecrating the uniforms, if you will, with the swoosh. Editorial comment. Now, if you know anything about Nike, if you ever watched like Flex Swing on Netflix, etc., they have clothes designers. They take the clothes and they match to the tonality of the skin of the athlete or anything else. And here we go. And for the folks that don't know, what happened is when they actually showed the uniforms, they very graphically show the privates to get down to the very basics of the people in the uniform. Now, I have an idea. Baseball is played outside. Baseball is played in the sun. So how about we go outside and look at the uniforms in the sun? I can see you. Next slide.
So how's this going to affect our profession now? Peter gave some great examples of some of the basics that we've got to do, okay? So how's AI going to help you? We've gone through the basics, things you got to do, and we're going to harp on that, do the basics, okay? So where can it help us? Risk assessment and prediction. We said before, I can start to analyze a lot of information and start to look at risk. Automated monitoring and processing. You saw in the vendor booths that there's a lot of automated monitoring going on. And I'm going to give you my take on things in a few minutes here. Decision support. I can make decisions quicker. Are we slow at making decisions? Him and I would get together and we'd have to have a conversation about something that's got to get done. We like to analyze stuff. We like to look at stuff. He'd ask me for more information. I'd get the more information. I'd ask my team. In a disaster, do you have all that time? No. I have been asking for a very simple system since about 2010. Actually, codenamed it Project Nostradamus when I was with IBM. And it was that I wanted to detect a situation, connect that detection with probability to my planning software, and then my planning software connects to my orchestration and recovery engine. Seems pretty reasonable, doesn't it? I asked the folks this week, you have it? No, not yet. We're talking to each other. I said, great. 14 years later, we're now talking, which is a wonderful thing. So what I'd love to see is the prediction connected to the monitoring and the response, connected into decision support, and then connected into resource allocation. I want to allocate resources according to where I need them based on the situation that is occurring. I don't want to have to make that decision. I want it to be automated. I want you all to code it up. You decide, as the business continuity professionals, what should happen based on, of course, the normal things we look at, a BIA and those kinds of things. What are the most important systems that should get priority? And then I want to allocate resources accordingly, but in an automated fashion. My question is, if we know what we're going to do based on a situation, why do we have to press a button? Shouldn't the system do that already? We've already programmed it to do it. We know it's going to do it, so we need to connect all of it. The natural language is going to be critically important. How it's important to you, as I said before, I don't have to worry about sending out communications in different languages, but more importantly, I don't have to worry about when stuff comes in. It automatically does a translation. If I'm dealing in New York City with dozens of different languages and people are sending me information, I want to be able to look at it and do something with it. I used to work for another company, and we were looking at something that was going to basically detect when terrorists were trying to sneak across the border. And it would look at trillions of pieces of information every day. Trillions. Not millions, not billions, trillions. And it would look at it in 70 different languages. That is the kind of natural language communications that we're talking about. Simulation and scenario planning. You now have the ability to take all of this and put it into a real life scenario and watch how the system works. That's what we should do. We should just set it up, run it, and say, what's going to happen? I've just detected, my scenario is, I've got a hurricane, I've got a cyber attack, and I've got a tornado or a flood. I've lost this building, this building, this building. What happens? Will my system handle it? Can I handle it? And I want to see it run automatically. I don't want to have to worry about, hey, I'm going to have to talk to everybody. The system should do it. Supply chain management. How many of you have systems set up that detect if you've got a major supplier or a critical supplier that basically is out of business because of a situation? There was a class example, a few years ago where a chip manufacturer had a fire in one of their plants. If I'm making computers, I sure as heck want to know if my supplier just took a hit. So I should be monitoring that and immediately switching over to another supply chain and adjusting my supply chain. That's the kind of things that can be done now, and that's the kind of things that you can plan for. So it's beyond your company. You're looking at the ecosystem now. And that's what AI is going to start to give you as the planner. How am I looking at the ecosystem? I'm not just worrying about me, I'm worrying about suppliers. The presentation before this talked about third-party risk, right? We are relying on a lot of third parties. Well, guess what? If you're relying on a lot of third parties, you got to worry about them too. At the DOE, I implemented a third-party risk program. Why? Because all my third parties were taking my data. And I'm only as secure as that data. So if that data gets out, guess what? The auditors, the regulators, the folks in Albany that I would have to report to really didn't care that it was a third party. They're saying, Rich, your responsibility. It was your data. So I want to be able to look at the supply chain and figure out where it's going, where it's coming back, and being able to adjust. And finally, the threat detection. Okay? This is going to help us immensely. I'm going to tell you now, your job is dramatically changing. It is. You're no longer business continuity planners. You're resilience professionals, and therefore you need to be worried about disaster recovery, business continuity, IT availability, cybersecurity, governance, and compliance. That's how I view my world as a CISO. That means when I talk to you, I expect you to view your world the same way I view it, because it's all linked. It's all linked. And you've got to look at that and how AI is going to help in that, because your head's about to explode and you're saying, I don't have that all. Well, you're going to have to think about it. So, what can we expect? The vendors that were here this week are all moving in this direction. You've heard AI. I'm not going to keep repeating what they've said, but they're going to start to provide improved analytics. They are. They're going to start to do a better job of detecting. If you took a look at what Alert Media, OnSolve, Everbridge, what they're looking at and what they're trying to do. Okay, pretty cool stuff as far as I can see. I did ask them, how are you connecting into the planning software? Because I want to have an automated incident response. One of the things that I would have to do on any incident I had was report up to Albany and explain to them what my incident response plan was, how I executed it, what was the impact, how I mitigated it, how did I contain it, how did I do this, how did I do that. That's what was required. And I was really happy if I didn't have to present to the governor's office or the mayor's office. Really was kind of a lot of fun not to have to do that, okay? And also, never a good day when the FBI is walking into your office. Not a good day, okay? Not a good day. But that incident response and the dynamic resource allocation, how many of you here have more than enough employees and resources in your company to get all your job done and not have to worry about ever being stressed out? Anybody? None of us. None of us. I would constantly go to him and say, come on, I need more resources. And he'd say, prove it. I had the resource, I had to use them appropriately. Appropriately. He was actually pretty good about giving me what I needed, but still, he'd say, show me you're using everything you've got appropriately. So the dynamic resource allocation, who's doing what, how it's happening, and what am I doing with the resources. The workflow automation. Again, I go back to what I'm looking for, okay? What these companies are doing. That intelligence that is being put into the workflow. They're going to connect all of this, folks. Your job is to push them to do it. If any of these vendors tells you, oh yeah, we've got APIs and you could do this, just look at them and say, I'm not your integrator. I am a purchaser. I want to purchase the thing that works end to end. Make it work. Don't make me do it for you. The anomaly detection. I'm constantly looking for those anomalies. When you've got that many students, that many teachers, that many parents, I am looking for the anomalies, the things that I'm going to try to see what's happening. It might not be cyber. I'm looking for the anomalies on power, because if power affects the school gets shut down, what happens to the students? Where are they going? Okay? I need to monitor all of it and determine if I'm not only going to have a problem in a school, but I'm going to have a problem in my data center. The natural languaging processing, we've said before, they're getting better at it. The simulation, scenario, and planning, okay? Other things they're getting better at. And the post-incident review. The post-incident, is a gold mine of information. I used to always look at it and tell my team, everything is a learning experience. Everything. If we have an incident, let's learn from it. Let's figure out what happened and what we could do to get better. Because he's going to ask me that question. What did you get out of it? How are we going to make sure it doesn't happen again? I used to tell him all the time, one day you're going to fire me. Did I tell you that the first day? I told you you were going to have to fire me one day?
Yep. They fired me first, by the way.
But I told him that because when I look at the post-incident, I have to make sure I'm doing my job, and sometimes somebody has to take the hit. Luckily, he didn't have to fire me, okay? Because I tried to work my butt off for him, okay? So, these are the things that the companies are working on.
All right. This is fundamental regardless of what kind of technology you're buying. When we're talking about AI, I'm going to apply it to AI. Number one, the first thing you want to do is you want to sit down and make your requirements. What is mandatory and what is optional that you don't necessarily need. Now, if I'm thinking about DR, for as an example, I would separate predictive and preventive from recovery. They're not mutually exclusive. I understand that. but separate them so it keeps your focus, and when you're trying to understand what you're going to buy, you don't get all twisted up because you see some great little thing. The second is look around your shop and what vendors do you already have there. I'm telling you, as a 6-time CIO, you come into me and you want to buy a new product, you're an HPE shop and you haven't looked at Zerto, or you're Palo Alto and you haven't looked at Rulebook and you want to buy something else, I'm going to send you packing. As a CIO, things get very complicated very quick and you got to do budget. The interview with a CIO 2 weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal, she has 220 subscriptions now. She's going to have more subscriptions than she's going to have people. So you've got to take advantage of what it is that you have in your shop. The third thing is, I didn't talk to all of them, but a vast majority of them. They're all willing to do pilots. I love pilots. It gets you a chance to try it out. And many of the pilots right now, they can spin them up in 10 minutes and you don't need help. If you're doing a pilot with a vendor, be good to the vendor, all right? They have finite resources just like you, and it costs them money. So be very focused about what it is, and don't have your pilots go on for months at a time. That means you're really not serious. You're wasting everybody's time, whatever. Now, I put on here, ask for references. It's not what you think. I want to know, when I bought phone systems in the 80s, I asked for references. I wanted 3 types. Somebody that just bought, somebody that had 12 months, somebody had 24 months. The 12 and 24 aren't applicable here, but I would ask them to get 12 and 24. They'll tell you everything at that point. The thing doesn't work. The account manager's a meatball. They can't fix it, blah, blah, blah. The reason I want to know what somebody's buying, I want to know what they were thinking. What was their approach? What was important to them? There is a trove of information that can be so important to you to help shape your journey when you're buying. They will tell you things that will keep you focused. They will tell you things you just think, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Or they will tell you things. I had a guy say to me, yeah, you know, I bought Northern Telecom because my boss's brother-in-law works for Northern Telecom. I had another guy that only bought Siemens. Now, why did you only buy Siemens? When I was a CIO in Massachusetts, I spoke a lot about open standards and open source because we were trying to break the proprietary technology models in government. And there was a CIO in California that was counter that. He was Southwest Airlines. Southwest Airlines buys one type of airplane. Is there goodness in this? Why? You have to train the stewardess, the ground crew, the pilots, and the mechanics all on one thing. It's simple. It may not be, cool. It may not be esoteric, but it's got value in that, and I want you to keep that in mind. And when you get somebody, maybe you get lucky, and they'll tell you about who else they evaluated, and that's very helpful to you too, because you can figure out what they eliminated or not. And by the way, they may turn around and start talking to you and asking you what your approach is. And if they're looking at you like you have a third eye in your forehead, that means that that's the stupidest thing they ever heard, and you want to hear that from them rather than hear that from your boss. If you're going to build something, by the way, keep it simple, all right? I can't overemphasize this. Elon Musk is going to Mars. You don't have to. So whatever you do, do it and just practice. Rich.
Okay, so you heard what Peter said. Keep it simple, okay? Keep it very simple. Focus on the tangible benefits. When I used to go to him and say, this is what I want, and I knew he was going to have to go to the administration and ask for it, keep it simple. These are the tangible benefits. This is what the outcomes are going to be. Problem, solution, benefits. Keep that in mind. Problem, solution, benefits. That's how I always did it with them. Explain how it automates tasks done by humans. Don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying we're eliminating people. It's just helping me. It's a tool that's going to help me and my team do their job better and faster, okay? And that's how I looked at it. As I got finite resources, I could cover more. How can it cost effectively analyze vast amounts of information? I don't have the time to look at everything. My team can't look at everything. We would look at huge amounts of data, and I would say, look, there's got to be a better way. Let's analyze it more effectively so I can get to where we want to be, which is what the problem is, okay? Help improve detection and recovery times. If I can detect the problem, I go back to what I said. I want to detect it. I want to then determine what my solution is going to be. I'm going to have to do this, this, and this, and I want to execute. And I want to do that quickly, okay? Very, very quickly. I know we like to take time to make decisions, but I'm trying to improve the detection and recovery times on everything so that everything's back up. I said before, 1.3 million students. I can't tell the kids or their parents, I'm sorry, they're not learning today. That's unacceptable. That doesn't happen. COVID was an interesting story, right? We had a system set up that allowed them to learn from home. Nobody ever heard, anybody hear any problems from New York City? 1.3 million kids learning from home. It worked. But we never planned on it, but we were able to execute on it. Assess and prioritize the actions, okay? So you want to be able to explain to your boss how this is going to help do that, and then optimize the processes and workflows faster. It's about speed, accuracy. It's about getting things done more efficiently with the people you have, okay? That's what they're going to ask for. That's what he would ask for, and that's what the administration is going to ask for. It can help you learn incidents and improve future response. I said before, you've got to take advantage of that gold mine of information that you've got following an incident. You really need to take advantage of it, and AI is going to help you do that. And it's not about replacing employees. Make sure you say that. Don't go to management and say, oh yeah, we're going to be able to cut 20 employees. That's not it. That's not going to work. That will not get you anywhere, okay? It won't. And by the way, if you said something like that, I guarantee you're going to get pushback from people. Do not underestimate the power of people to slow you down, to deflect you, and to be able to basically destroy your plans. You've got to get them on board with you. So make sure that you do that. So when you go to the executives and you say, okay, look, I want you to think of AI as my assistant. Never sleeps, never takes a vacation, is there when my people need them, can help my people do their job more effectively, can help them to do things more quickly. I'm presenting it that way. That's how I presented it. That's how I presented it when I went to the Chancellor's office and he had me go to the Chief Financial Officer and present it. And I said, I need this, $53 million. And they said, okay, this is going to make it better. You will make things better. And that's how you want to present it to the executives, that it's going to improve on things and it's going to make life easier for everybody.
All right. How many people have heard of stochastic parrots? There's a word that goes around like all the cynics about AI would say that the large language models are not capable of learning language. And what they actually do is just parrot back synthetic, good-sounding text that makes some sense. If you worked in IT, we've got an industry full of these people. They'll come back and they'll just give you all kinds of gobbledygook that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I'm not going to go through the examples here because we're going to run out of time. My 2 points here. Number one, if you're in a room and somebody asks you a question, you know something about that, and you think that your peers think that you will know, you're not going to not raise your hand and say, I don't know, because people just won't do that. It's human nature. And I want you to think about that when you're working and building DR plans and disaster recovery. Make sure you can do things in English. So what does this have to do? I heard this all week. I can't get people to work with me. I can't get management's attention. Now, I'm going to tell you just a couple of things. Number one, you got to do it in English. All right, you got to do it in plain English or plain Spanish, whatever your language is, in a way that people can understand. Explain it so it makes sense. I'm going to get very basic here for a minute. You're going to go see an executive. Number one, you set an agenda ahead of time. Number two, you dress as that executive dress. If they wear a suit and tie or a professional dress, you dress up. You set yourself apart from all the other people. We got casual dress now. People come in, I can't avoid people dress anymore. It's crazy. You separate yourself from that. When you get there no earlier than 7 minutes and no later than 5 minutes. If you're there earlier than 7 minutes, you're a pain in the butt to the administrative assistant. If you're later than 5 minutes, they don't think you want to do things on time. When you go in, you have the agenda and you bring it right out. You're thinking the person should have the agenda. They have email diarrhea like all the rest of it, but they probably haven't seen it. All right, so just have it and make sure you prepared. So they're thinking about this person dresses well, they're prepared. Have a pen too in case they don't have a pen, but make it a cheap one because they might not give it back. All right, go through your agenda, explain it in English, make sure that they can understand it, summarize and get up and just say, I'm going to send you some minutes after this, I'm going to send them out within like 3 hours, and I'm going to do this follow-up later on. And make sure you do the follow-up. If you're looking for somebody for your committees, ask them if they want to recommend somebody. If they say, do you have somebody in mind? Have somebody in mind. Have somebody in mind that you think you can work with. I heard you don't have any attention from management. The board of directors is now watching. In the fall, the Security and Exchange Commission said any public company that had a security event has to report it within 48 hours. Clorox was the poster child of that. I feel bad for anybody that has a security event because it's very hard to keep going and understanding what happens to stuff. But here's the point. There is a new regulation now that started in January, and it's SEC item 105.8K. You have to report what you're doing about prevention. If you have to report what you're doing about prevention, don't you have to report what you're doing about recovery? All right, this is your opportunity to get in front of people and explain the plans that you're doing, explain what you're doing and how you're going to get there. Chris Hurst and Michael DeLorean, when they were talking about this yesterday, they were talking about influencing practices. Yes, they had information and they had tools, but do you think that Michael, when he was in talking to the executives, went in jeans and shoes and like that? Of course he didn't, all right? Be different, stand out, and people will actually understand that. Joe Miner was talking to us, and it was talking about the generational differences, and he was talking about the opportunity of folks in BCP and DR. Everybody, all the executive suite knew who he was. And they knew who he was because he was in front of them all the time. He was very credible. It's your opportunity for people to appreciate you and allow your career trajectory to go well beyond what it is you're doing if you want to do something different. Rich.
So you kind of heard also what Peter said. It's true. When I presented to him, I had to make sure, I always did this, suit and tie, agenda, had my facts straight, make sure I knew what he was looking for, and make sure that I answered it. Don't waste his time. Because very often you'll only get 15 minutes. So you better get to the meat of the presentation or the material right away, because he's going to want to know it. And he's going to want to know, how am I going to use this when I have to present it up, okay? So it's something to think about. So 10 steps. 10 steps for getting ready for AI DR in your company. First, assess your organizational resilience. Figure out where you are. Are you really ready for it, okay? Have you really gone through and you know what the processes are, the technologies, the resources? You know who the stakeholders are. Who are you presenting to? Who's this going to impact? Okay? If you don't have buy-in from them, remember what I told you before, you will get people who will derail what you're trying to do. You've got to get them on board with you. So make sure you assess the organizational readiness. And look at your technical infrastructure. Does your IT team have the ability to do this? Define objectives and use cases. Make sure that you know exactly what you're going to try to do. What are the use cases you're trying to accomplish, okay? Define them. Quick hits. He would always like to say, pilot, tell me what's going on, show me that you've done it, and then we can move on. So build, define the objective, build cross-functional teams. I said before, I used to talk with the chief privacy officer. I used to talk to the IT folks, the CTO. I would talk to the CDO, but I'd be talking to myself. Okay, so you've got to talk to all of the people that you have to communicate with. And make sure that they're all on board. If you get them on board, you're going to do a lot better. I know what you're saying. You're saying, how do I get to them? Listen to what Peter said. Reach out to them. Show them you're trying to solve a problem that they've got. That's what you're trying to do. The data strategy and governance. Let's talk about that too. What is the data strategy? Develop a comprehensive data strategy. I had a lot of data, and I had to know how I was going to either recover it or I was going to secure it. So I had to have that data strategy and make sure that, I'm ensuring compliance. A lot of compliance, okay? It does no good to come up with a new strategy or architecture if it doesn't meet the compliance of your company. You got to make sure you've got that in sync with what you're trying to do. Invest in talent. You don't need to know all of this. I said before, you have to have a basic understanding, but you have to hire the right people. You got to get those people. Get your team. Make sure your boss knows, I need this talent. I can't do it myself. I need to make sure. Always surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. I used to say that all the time. I always hired people smarter than me. And I would always tell them, you have to tell me if I'm driving the car and the bridge is out over here. Because if it's out, we're both going off that cliff. We're both going off the cliff. So make sure that you tell me what's going on. I will trust you, but you got to tell me. Pilot projects and prototyping. Peter talked about that as well. Pilot, pilot, pilot. Try it. Hold the vendors accountable. Make sure it works. Set the parameters. Set the use case. Test it. Show that it works, and then move on. And then the risk management, making sure that you've got all of the contingency planning and everything else. I'm going to quickly move on because Lisa's over here, okay?
All right, very quickly about DR. And it's AI, it's the same thing. You don't need to know everything, but you need to know somebody that knows it in their backup. Hurricane Andrew was the most, in 1992, was the most studied event up to that point. What did they learn? People would not leave their families, they would not leave their loved ones to go and actually do effective disaster recovery. So keep that in mind. You want to exercise continually. One of the things that I used to do was participate in every large initiative that went on in the banks that I worked for. Why did I do that? Number one, it used to be self-preservation, even though I didn't have anything to do it, because I know those jamokes were going to blow the thing up and I was going to have to fix something anyway. But I was doing something different. I was identifying people and how they worked, who were the subject matter experts. If you're doing an upgrade, you're moving a data center, whatever you're doing, it's basically the setting of a business continuity or disaster recovery plan, because you have to put the new thing in, you have to test it, and if it doesn't work, you got to back it out, and you got to make sure that the stuff brings. You want to get close to those people because they're going to actually help you actually do what it is. I always make sure I had time benchmarks. When somebody comes screaming at me, you got to go faster. It takes 3 hours to whatever it does. Be clear about your priorities. Make sure that the senior management has already agreed to them. When that 6'3", 275 brute comes down, you know, the one with the veins popping out of his neck and starts screaming at you, you go, these are what the priorities. Do not let them make it your problem. And also protect your people. Let your people do the work. You stay in front of them. But it's not their problem either, it's a we problem. We have to do that collectively and collaboratively. Set up regular communications. I like 2 hours. If it's longer than 2 hours, people get antsy. If it's less 2 hours, then you can't really set progress. Murphy's Law, baby. If you got AI in there, it ain't going to be there when you need it. So you need to be thinking about that. And when you're doing the recovery, remember this. Things aren't always as they seem. Rich?
Okay, so in summary, AI can improve how we predict, detect, and respond to disasters. Good thing, right? Provides us with an assistant that never sleeps or takes days off. Love that. I love that. Increase the amount of data that we can consume and we can analyze, okay, which is critically important. Optimize those allocation of resources, where they got to go, how they got to get there, when they got to be there. Improves our communication during an event. All of these things help. And then finally, it enhances our scenario planning. As a BC professional myself, all of these things help me do my job.
Summary, AI can be very helpful, but remember the basics of IT management. And remember that the toes you step on today may belong to the AI you have to kiss tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, folks.
Another round of applause for Rich and Peter. I can listen to you all day. Let me just know, just you know that. Again, don't forget to do the session surveys for a chance to win one of the 3 free passes for DRJ Spring 2025. And now I must say, we've come to an end. I hope you leave here from this conference armed with knowledge and connections with other professionals to unleash the power of resilience at your organization. Attendees will be sent an email link to access replays of the sessions, recordings, and all the files in the Attendees Hub. DRJ would like to thank, again, our attendees, our speakers, our board, our sponsors for helping bring us all back together. I want to personally thank my friend, Bob Arnold, and the small but mighty DRJ team for putting together another great conference, so let's thank them. thank you so much for allowing me to be your MC. I didn't get any tomatoes thrown at me, no peanuts, nothing. So you guys, I appreciate you. Lunch is out in the foyer, grab and go lunch. I just want to say this has been a great time. I love seeing my people, being with my people, and with that, see you in Florida. Oh, see you in Dallas, actually. See you in Dallas. Have a good one, everyone. Thank you.